RSI Cornell University Library Fit and SWA Degree as some minor Re 3 1924 023 005 279. The original of Tliasbul is in Tyne Cornell University Library. There are no known copyright restrictions in the United States on the use of the text. http://www.archive.org/details/cu3192402300527 Parsi, Jaina and Sikh. Some minor religious sects in India. Horace Hart, printer to the University. Parsi, Jaina and Sikh or some minor religious sects in India. CFTEE Dlittlemeo PRIEXIG FOT 1897 Douglas M. Thornton, B.A. Trinity College and Ridley Hall, Cambridge. Muppet of Amka Matting Toy Yap Lil Y4 VO $F The Religious Tract Society 56, Paternoster Row and $6 St. Paul's Churchyard 1898. The regulations under which Sir Peregrine Maitland's prize is awarded by the University of Cambridge provide that the essay be printed at the expense of the successful candidate. In pursuance of this regulation, the present essay is made public. Preface. With a word of introduction. Amidst the many evolutions of Indian religious thought, there is often a danger of losing sight of individual influences at work. The selection of these three religious sects of Parsi, Jaina, and Sikh will, it is hoped, stimulate further study of those ages of religious inquiry which have given birth to so many schools of thought. The Parsi and the Sikh religions are of twofold interest, as being religious faiths that have given birth to nations. Parsiism has, therefore, been treated more from an historical than a present-day standpoint, which latter fails to give a true impression of its value as a study. The Parsi can rightly claim to have encouraged the study of Sikh's preface philology, and of the comparative method of investigating the religions of the world. The distinctive tenets of the Jaina take us, for their origin, back to the Buddhist era in India, that greatest era of religious speculation that the world has ever known. And hence the study of Jaina philosophy throws many sidelights on the origin of Buddhism and the period which gave it birth. It is time that this were recognized more widely by Anglo-Indians. The Sikh remind us of the entrance of Islam into India, and the era of its struggle with reforming Hinduism. Their faith embodies both the pantheism of the Brahmin and the monotheism of the Muslim, being itself the product of the reflections of successive teachers under both these influences. DMT. All Saints' Day, 1898. Contents. Chapter I. The Paxi I. Parsiism and its place in history. Ancient and modern knowledge of Zoroastrianism. Biblical, classical, medieval, European. 9-2. The Parsi scriptures. Definition of Avesta, Zand, Pahlavi, Phasand, and Husvaris. The language of the Zend Avesta. Its original extent. The formation of a canon. Present contents. Methods of interpretation. 14.3. The origin and founder of Zoroastrianism. The personality of Zoroaster. His age and birthplace. Zoroastrian theology before Alexander the Magi. Aryan and Iranian elements. 25.4. The ritual of the Zend Avesta. Birth, marriage, and burial ceremonies. The Towers of Silence. 29v. Parsi history. The Mohammedan conquest of Persia. Emigration to India. Present population, mortality, and occupations. Parsi costumes, sects, calendar, festivals, laws, and government. 32. Chapter 2. The Jaika. Their present extent and social importance. Discovery of their origin. Mahavira, the 24th Jaina. Mahavira, a contemporary and rival to Buddha, parallels and contrasts the influence of Gosala Brahmanism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Their relationship. Jainism not a Buddhist sect. Jaina, Buddhist, and 8 contents. Page. Brahman vows. Compare Jainism. A development of Jairamanism. The institution of the 4th Ajrama. Views on the Atman. 39.2. Authenticity of Jaina tradition. The Muttara inscriptions. The age of Jaina literature. Date of Devardhai and the Jaina canon. Date of composition of the Siddhanta tests of scientific knowledge, by language and spelling of the texts, and by the meters used. Works older than the existing canon. The Tirva contents of the Siddhanta. 49.3. Antiquity of Jaina philosophy. Early Jaina doctrines. The eternity of Atman, the Kriyavada, the annihilation of Karman, the 3 Danda, The doctrine of Katu Yamasambarasambuto, early religious practices of Nigantha, leading Jaina doctrines of today Jiva and Ajiva Moksha, the Jaina worship and temples. 57 Chapter 3 The Sikh circumstances under which Sikhism came into existence, the era of modern Hinduism, the Vaishnava Kablur 69-2. The history of the Sikh religious and political, the 10 Gurus Gobind Singh and the Khalsa Sikh Wars, British occupation of the Punjab 72-3. The Granth or Sacred Book of the Sikh, its two parts, its language and authors, cardinal doctrines, the unity of the Supreme Being, relation of man to the Supreme, the origin of sin, life after death, the means of emancipation, the authority of the Guru. 84. Other Sikh observances, the Golden Temple at Amritsar, Sikh population and denominations, Christian messians to the Punjab 88 Chapter I the Parsi, I form the light, and erat darkness, I make peace, and create evil, I am the Lord, that doeth these things. ISA. XLV 7, EB. Parsiism and its place in history, ancient and modern knowledge of Zoroastrianism, biblical, classical, medieval, European. 2. The Parsi scriptures, definition of Avesta, Zand, Pahlavi, Fazand, and Husvaris, the language of the Zendavesta, its original extent, the formation of a canon, present contents, methods of interpretation. NI. The origin and founder of Zoroastrianism, the personality of Zoroaster, his age and birthplace, Zoroastrian theology before Alexander the Magi, Aryan and Iranian elements. 4. The ritual of the Zendavesta, birth, marriage, and burial ceremonies, the Towers of Silence. V. Parsi history, the Mohammedan conquest of Persia, emigration to India, present population, mortality and occupations, Parsi costumes, sects, calendar, festivals, laws, and government. Parsiism, and its place in history. The history of the world is full of eras when momentous changes have happened suddenly, as well as of long periods of progress and decay between the storms of action. Migrations of the human race, and rise of kingdoms in the East and West, have caused a series of great shocks when nations meet. And as the monuments of the past unravel history, it is remarkable to see how often boundaries of Western Asia have become this meeting place, and how the times of meeting mark the promulgation of some new and great religion of the world. 10. Parsiism, the age of Abraham and period of the kings, are known to be an age of strife between the dynasties of Africa and Asia, while ancient Israel lay between the two. The period of Achaemenian kings and Medo-Persian Empire marks the rise of Zoroastrianism. And though the East received its checks at Marathon and Salamis, the brilliant short career of Alexander added to the doctrines of the Magi Western culture, and wider scope of influence on Greek philosophy and Jewish thought, while, on the other side, an open door from India made a way of entrance into Persia for the teachings of the Brahman and the Buddha. Lastly, the Roman Empire and universal peace prepared 3 continents to receive the Christ of God, until Mohammed's holy war stirred up the lingering forces of disintegration in the East and West. Ancient and modern knowledge of Zoroastrianism. The history of research into the religion of Zoroaster has been well divided into 3 periods: the classical, the medieval, and the modern inquiries. But only a few important names and authorities will be mentioned here, gathered from Jewish, Greek, Roman, Armenian, Mohammedan, and European sources. Bible witness. The Old Testament contains 2 allusions to the Magi and their worship, in JXXXIX. 3. Rav Mag, or the chief of the Magi, figures as an influential member of Nebuchadrezzar's party, proving that they had reached Babylon by 600 BC, and in Ezekiel 16, where their worship of the sun is hinted at. Besides these passages, there is much indirect evidence that Cyrus held beliefs somewhat similar to the Hebrew captives, CFISA Sliv 28, XLVI, Sliv 11. While in the New Testament the adoration of the Zoroastrianism to Magi at the Epiphany of Christ is of historic interest, Matt 2I. Classical witness. Greek and Latin writers about the Magi are very numerous. Among those who have given the best information are to be found, Herodotus, 450 BC, Ctesias, 400 BC, Theopompus, 300 BC, and Hermippus, 350 BC. The latter is quoted by both Pliny and Plutarch as having made elaborate investigations, now lost, into all Zoroastrian books. Eudoxus and Aristotle are quoted by Diogenes of Laert as having grasped the dualistic doctrine of the Magi. Among later writers Strabo, 60 BC, Dio Chrysostomus, 130 AD, Pausanias, 180 AD, Berosus, Damascius, and Theodorus figure, and give respectively histories of the fire worship, theology, and dualism of the Persians. Medieval witness. Two Armenians, Esnach and Elysius, denounced their heresies and compiled a history in the 5th century AD. Then came Masudi, the famous Arab historian and traveler, 950 AD, with more reliable information on the Avesta, the Zand, and the Pazand. He dated Zoroaster at 610 BC, and did much to explain the meaning of words. 2 centuries later Shahrastani wrote on Keligious sects and creeds. Though underscore a Mohammedan, he gives a most favorable account of the Magi, and classifies them with great discretion among the Jews, Christians, and Mohammedans as having their creed founded on revealed books. He reported several Magian sects as existing at the time, 1153 AD obit. But during all the time of the Middle Ages the ignorance of Western writers about the Magi was profound. European witness. After the Renaissance inquiries began again, and the nations of modern Europe came into contact with 12 Parsiism, the adherents of the Zoroastrian religion in the western part of India, where they had settled, when they left their fatherland, Persia, to escape the persecutions of the Mohammedan/Thomas Hyde, of Oxford, has the honor of making the first deep research into the classics upon the subject. But he knew not the Avesta language. It was Ainquetil Duperon whose example inspired others to follow. He furnished Europe with 180 manuscripts of several Oriental languages for research, and gave a general outline of the contents of the Avesta to the literary world in 1771. He had his critics in Sir W. William Jones, Richardson, Meniers, and Tykson, but Cleojacer proved the authenticity of his work from the classics, and Rask proved the close affinity of the Avesta with Sanskrit. As early as 1793 Sylvester de Sacy began to decipher Sasanian inscriptions. Then Eugene Bouvechouve, the Frenchman, became the founder of Avesta philology, and published the first edition of Avesta texts which had appeared in Europe, 1829-43. He showed the value of Niryosanga's Sanskrit translation of the greater part of the Avesta, but never having studied Pahlavi his work proved incomplete. After him followed a number of German scholars, such as Olshausen, Bopp, and Miller, Friedrich Spiegel, Hermann Brockhaus, Westergaard, and Martin Hogg, of lesser lights Dunker, Lassen, Windishman, Bleek, and Justy, while more recently West, Mills, de Harlez, and Darmstetter have come to the front. A longer notice is due to some of these scholars. Hermann Brockhaus, the Sanskrit professor at Leipzig, was the first to publish a rudimentary Avesta dictionary, 1850, and an edition of the Vandidad Sada in Roman characters with index and glossary. This book did much to stimulate Avesta studies in Germany. Friedrich Spiegel aimed at giving the world a critical edition of the whole of the writings in the Avesta language, based upon a comparison of all the manuscripts M. Estergaard and Hogg 13 then extant in Europe. Wickley chiefly lay in Copenhagen, Paris, London, and Oxford. His researches have been of great value. He brought out a grammar of Pazand, I 851, and also of Husvarus, I 856-60, thus unraveling some of the most difficult pieces of work that the philologist had to do. Then came his 2 volumes of Avesta translation, 1853-8. Westergaard collected his information from all Europe, India, and Persia. He, first, discovered the Gatha to be metrical pieces, and then published Avesta texts, 1854. But he was too cautious to translate quickly. His texts are admirable and have never been superseded. Hogg built upon Brockhaus' compilation and Westergaard's Yasna text. Then he tried to study the Gatha, and found Ainquitil's translation useless. Foiled in this, he studied the Veda, Armenian, Pahlavi, and Modem Persian, to enable him to collect all the parallel passages in the Zendavesta and arrange them. Phi found the Veda the most useful for his purpose, and brought out his work the Five Gudhas 1858-60. Appointed as Sanskrit professor in Pune College, he continued his researches, especially in A. Gujarat for manuscripts, 1863-4. Further study of Pahlavi and Husvaras somewhat modified his views on the supposed antagonism between Veda and Avesta antecedents. Several works have been published by him, 1868-74, while he was professor at Munich. His famous essays on the Farsis have been edited in England by Mr. E. W. West, and form a standard work upon the subject. West began to help Hogg in his revision of his last work on the Parsi religion, the Book of Ardverdf, 1872, and its glossary, 1874, of Pahlavi Pasand. He has also published several other works, e.g. the Book of the Manual Record, but he is specially noted for his Pahlavi texts in the Oxford series of Sacred Books of the East, Vols. v. 18, XXIV, XXXVII, which came out between 1880 and 1893. 14. The Parsi scriptures. Dharms Tedder proved himself to be a genius in 1875, when he brought out his essay on the mythology of the Avesta. To him has been entrusted the translation of the Zendavesta in the Oxford series. Vols. 4, XXIII are his, Vol XXXI being due to Mr. L. H. Mills, and consisting of the Yasna, Visparad, and parts of the Kordavesta. Especially valuable is his introduction to Vol. 4, second edition, 1895, which has been largely used in the following pages. J.D.E. Harles brought out a translation of the Avesta, 1881, with some useful discussions in the introduction. To the Parsi scriptures. The common name given to the Parsi sacred books, by Europeans, is the Zendavesta. This term has found favor in Europe, since the days of Ainquitil Duparan, but it is rather a misleading name. So it will be well to clear the ground at the start, and decide upon what each term means, in order to avoid all ambiguity later on. There are 5 words used in connection with the Parsi scriptures, and needing some explanation. They are Avesta, Zand, Pahlavi, Jand, and Husvdris. Mr. West has put very clearly the proper relationship between the first 3 of these terms when he says the Avesta and Pahlavi of the same scripture, taken together, form its Avesta and Zand, terms which are nearly synonymous with revelation and commentary. European scholars, misled probably by Mohammedan writers, have converted the phrase Avesta and Zand into Zendavesta, and have further identified Zand with the language of the Avesta. Then he proceeds to explain that this use of the word Zand is quite at variance with the practice of all Parsi writers who spe, Vol. v. Pahlavi texts, PTIPX Pahlavi 15 have been independent of European influences, as they apply the term Zand only to the Pahlavi translations and explanations of their sacred books, the original text of which they call Avesta. So that when they use the phrase Avesta and Zand, they mean the whole of any scripture, both the Avesta text and Pahlavi translation and commentary. 1. Hogg, however, has a further explanation of how the term Zendavesta came to be widely used. He says it is probable that the term Zend was originally applied to commentaries written in the same language as the Avesta, for in the Pahlavi translation of the Yasna, when the scriptures are mentioned, both terms, Avistak va Zand, are used, as if of equal authority. At any rate the later, or Pahlavi, Zand appears also in many places to be merely a translation of this earlier, or Avesta, Zand, with additional explanations offered by the Pahlavi translators. In this case, Zendavesta would not be a wholly inappropriate term, Avesta having extended its meaning from the more ancient texts to all later explanations of those texts in the same language. The term Pahlavi, or language of Pahlav, next calls for explanation. It is not necessary to investigate its derivation, except to adopt Hogg's explanation, that it is connected with the Partha of the cuneiform inscriptions, the land of the Parthians known to the Greeks and Eamons, and of the Pallava mentioned by Sanskrit writers. The change of Partha into Pallav is very similar to that of Mithra into Persian Mir. In its widest extent, the word Pahlavi is applied to all the varying forms of the medieval Persian language, but it has long been practically restricted to the written language of Persia during the Sasanian dynasty, and to the literature of that period and a short time after, of which some fragments sbe, vol. t. Pahlavi Tets, Ptipx Hogg's Essays on the Sacred Language, Writings, and Diction of the Parsis, p. 120. I6 The Parsi scriptures have been preserved by the Parsi I. Any fragments of Pahlavi composition of later date than AD Luwa, must be considered merely as modem imitations of a dead language. The medieval Persian language is only called Pahlavi, when it is written in one of the characters used before the invention of the modern Persian alphabet. Whenever it is transcribed either in Avesta characters or in those of the modem Persian alphabet, it is called Pazand, our fourth word that needed explanation. The word Pazand, therefore, probably means re-explanation, that is, a further interpretation of the Pahlavi Zand in the Persian vernacular. But the term is applied not only to the purely Persian words in Pahlavi texts, but also, as already noticed, to transliterations of the said texts, either in Avesta or modern Persian characters, in which all obsolete forms are replaced by their Pazand equivalents. These transliterations form what are called Pazand texts, and as many as have been examined seem to have been written in India. But we have not yet fully explained the mysteries of Pahlavi. It is precisely the peculiarity of the language, when written, that made its character a standing puzzle to European scholars, until Hogg first satisfactorily explained its mode of writing. The key to unlock the door of interpretation lay in the historical inscriptions. From them it was found that the Persians of Parthian times had, like the Assyrians of old, borrowed their writing from a foreign race, only, these later Aryan Persians accepted a Semitic alphabet, whereas the Semitic Assyrians adopted an Akkadian syllabary. Besides the alphabet, they also transferred a certain number of complete Semitic words to their writings, as representatives of the corresponding words Hogg's Essays on Parsis, p8i. The sacred language, Rhngs, and Seliajun Ojfthesbe, vol. Vptip 12 language of the Zendavesta 17 in their own language. The number of these might at any time be increased or diminished at the discretion of the writer, but they were probably never very numerous, for not more than 400 of them are to be found in the Pahlavi writings now extant. These represent nearly all the commonest words in the language, and so often constitute more than half the bulk of a Pahlavi text. Added to the 400 Semitic logograms already mentioned, we find also about 100 obsolete forms of Iranian words used as logograms, much in the same way as Christmas may be used for Christmas in English, or lb for pound. These logograms form what is called the Husvaris portion of the Pahlavi, while the other words, intended to be pronounced as they are spelt, form the Pazand portion. The conclusion, therefore, to which we have come is, that Pahlavi has the appearance of being a compound language. Some of its commonest words are written, either with Semitic letters, or as Semitic words, and a few of its words are written in obsolete Iranian, both of these kinds being called Husvaris. Other words are either purely Persian, or transliterated from Avesta characters, or from modem Persian characters into Pahlavi, these forms all taking the name of Pazand. And to add to the general confusion, Persian terminations are often added to Semitic words. As if this were not enough, there are good reasons for supposing that the language was never spoken as it was written. The language of the Zendavesta. It has been pointed out by Hogg that the languages of Persia, commonly called Iranian, form a separate family of the great Aryan stock of languages. Among Iranian languages proper, he classes SBE, Vol. VPTIP 13. B8 The Parsi scriptures. The ancient, medieval, and modem languages of Iran, in the following way: a. The East Iranian or Bactrian branch, extant only in two dialects, the Gatha and the classical Avesta. The former is the more ancient, and is the language of the so-called Gatha or hymns. The latter, in which most of the books of the Zendavesta are written, was for many centuries the spoken and written language of Bactria. These Bactrian languages seem to have died out in the 3rd century BC, leaving no daughters. And, the West Iranian languages, of Media and Persia, known to us during 3 periods, but only in the one dialect, which has at every period served as the written language throughout the Iranian provinces of the Persian Empire. These 3 periods of history were ancient Persia under the Achaemenians, BC 500 to 300, medieval Persia under the Arsacidans, BC 300 AD 236, of whom no records remain, modern Persia under the Sassanians, AD 200,600, who have left us many inscriptions on rocks and coins in the Pahlavi language. The original language of the Parsi scriptures, as we have seen already, is not rightly called Zend, and the term should be discarded, as having no reference to a language, but only to commentaries to a language. But, as we have seen, they are written in 2 dialects of the ancient Bactrian tongue. For want of a better term, we may follow the Parsi scholars in using the term Avesta for the language of the Avesta. What, then, is the Avesta language, so highly developed and rich in inflections? It is a sister of Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, and Gothic, no longer in the prime of Fe, but rather in declining years. Notwithstanding the symptoms of decay, its relation to the most ancient Sanskrit, the so-called Vedic dialect, is as close as that of the different dialects of the Greek Hogs essays, p65ff language of the Zendavesta 19 language to each other, e.g. Aulic, Ionic, Doric, and Attic. So that the languages of the sacred hymns of the Brahmin, and of those of the Parsi, are only the 2 dialects of 2 separate tribes of one and the same nation. It is noticeable that it is related closely to Vedic, and not to classical Sanskrit, differences in grammar being very small, and phonetic changes from one to the other very regular. The 2 dialects to which we have just referred are found in the language of the Gatha, and in the classical or ordinary Avesta. It is very difficult to decide whether they represent the same language at 2 different periods of time, or whether they are 2 contemporary dialects, spoken in 2 different provinces of the ancient Bactrian Empire. If the difference between the Gatha dialect and the Avesta language were only phonetic, it would be reasonable to suppose that they were 2 different methods of pronunciation, as generally happens in different districts with nations speaking the same language. There are great phonetic changes, and several of these are due to the lengthening of final vowels, e.g. ya into ed, and these are attributable to the custom of chanting the Gatha. But, besides phonetic, there are decided grammatical changes, so that throughout the Gatha are to be found fuller and older forms of speech, whereas in the Avesta language these forms are later and more contracted. Judging from these and other peculiarities, there is little doubt that the Gatha date back to a higher antiquity of composition than can be claimed for the ordinary Avesta. But as the differences are not so great as between Vedic and classical Sanskrit, or between the Greek of Homer and the Attic dialect, the Gatha dialect is about 2 centuries older than the ordinary Avesta language, which was itself the standard language of the ancient Iranian Empire under the Achaemenians. Much of the difficulty of understanding Zendavesta Ba. 20 the Parsi scriptures texts arises from the absence of a knowledge of grammar among ancient Persians and Bactrians. This had made the compilation of accurate texts very difficult, and Westergaard has had to take great trouble to give a correct text, according to the oldest manuscripts accessible to him. There is still a great need of phasing a sound and critical knowledge of the Avesta language. The original extent of the Zendavesta. Though the Zendavesta in its present state is a comparatively small book, we learn both from ancient classical writers, and from the tradition of the Parsi, that the religious literature of the ancient Persians was of considerable extent. Thus Pliny reports, on the authority of Hermippus the Greek philosopher, that Zoroaster composed 2 millions of verses, and an Arab historian, Abu Ja'far Atavari, assures us that Zoroaster's writings covered 1,200 cowhides, parchments. Such an extensive ancient literature could only be the work of centuries, for fit writing materials were both scarce and expensive, besides which Orientals require a long time for original composition. They are said to have possessed their whole scripture in the form of 21 books, called Naskh, each containing Avesta and Zand. Evidently the number 21 was an artificial arrangement, in order to have one Naskh to each of the 21 words of the most sacred formula of the Zoroastrians, and so, each of the Naskh was indexed under one particular word of this formula. Several descriptions of the contents of these Naskh are extant, and from them we see clearly that they must represent the whole religious and scientific literature current throughout the ancient Persian Empire, for they treated not only of religious topics, but of medicine, astronomy, agriculture, botany, philosophy, and sea. These were undoubtedly the books which were the Parsi canon 21 known to the Greeks and Romans, and indexes of them, similar to the catalogues of the ancient literature known to Parsi priests nowadays, were extant at the time of Alexander the Great. The history of the formation of a canon. We have already mentioned the fact of a collection and artificial arrangement of ancient literature, sacred to the Persians, into 21 Naskh. This was carried out during the Sasanian period, while Zoroastrianism was the state religion. But these Naskh were further subdivided into 3 classes, each containing 7 Naskh. They were known as the Gatha group, Gazan, the group of the law, Dad, and the group of the head Hamathra, what we should respectively call the theological, legal, and mixed groups of writings. There are 2 accounts given in the BVN card, which furnish us with a history of the formation of the Avesta, the one extending from its origin to the time of Alexander, and the other relating to the restoration of the Avesta after the Greek invasion, the first being vague and legendary, while the second is precise and historical. It would be beyond our subject to go into the details of this history, except in the first case, when we are considering the likely date of Zoroaster, the Gatha, and the earlier parts of the Avesta, and in the second, when we are establishing the year in which the canon was properly closed. All we would do here is to indicate the 3 occasions on which a collection was made from some old fragments. The first edition, to our surprise, emanated from a Parthian king, Vakhash, the second from the first Sasanian king, Ardashtr Babagan, AII 241 AD, the third and last from King Shapur I, 341 to 372 AD. Professor Wilson is convinced that the Din Mrd is a modern work, Parsi Religion, p. 414. SBE, Vol. 4 PTI, 2nd edition, PXXXVIII. 22. The Parsi Scriptures, the present contents of the Zendavesta. The Parsi ascribed the loss of most of their ancient writings, known to the Greeks, mainly to the ravages that followed on the conquest of the Persian Empire by Alexander the Great, especially on the occasion of the burning of the citadel and royal palace at Persepolis in a drunken frolic. And, as we know, these facts are mentioned by Western writers. But even if the official copies of the sacred books had been burnt and ravaged, there must have remained other copies of many portions of them, and it was from these scattered copies that the first Sasanian monarchs collected what they did, which was considerable. True, they were chiefly fragments, but some portion of nearly every book seems to have been recovered by them. The total disappearance of most of the books must be traced to recent times, and was due to the later ravages and persecutions of the Mohammedans. What now remain are divided generally into 2 groups. The Avesta proper contains, the Vandal Dad, a compilation of religious laws and of mythical tales, forming a priestly code; the Visparad, a collection of litanies for the sacrifice; the Yasna, a composition of similar litanies; and 5 Gatha, old hymns. The Khorda, or small, Avesta is composed of several short prayers, recited both by the priests and all the faithful at certain times and seasons. These are, the 5 Ga, the 30 formulae of Saraza, the 3 Afrigan, the 6 Nyas. Hogg's Essays, pages 123 to 125. SBE, Vol. 4, Zendavesta, 2nd edition, PTI pages XXXI. Interpretation of the Zendavesta 23. It is also usual to include the ist, or hymns of praise, and a number of fragments, e.g. the Hadhokanesk. The Avesta proper is found in manuscripts in two different forms, either each of the three books are by themselves, in which case they are generally accompanied by a Pahlavi translation, or the three are mingled together according to the requirements of the liturgy. In this case the collection is called the Vandadad Sada, or Vandadad Pure, as it exhibits the original text alone without a translation. What helped to preserve the Avesta is obvious. Taken as a whole it does not profess to be a religious encyclopedia, but only a liturgical collection, and it bears more likeness to our prayer book than to our Bible. Thus the Vandadad Sada, which had to be recited every day, would be more carefully preserved than the ist, which are generally recited only once a month. And we are no longer in the dark as to the character and contents of that larger literature of which our Avesta is but a remnant, for it is now known to us in its general outlines through a Pahlavi analysis, which was made in the 9th century, 2 centuries after the Arab conquest, at a time when the sacred literature of Sasanian times was still in existence. Interpretation of the Zendavesta. There are two distinct methods in use of interpreting the sacred scriptures of the Parsi, called the comparative and the traditional methods. The comparative school hold that the key to the Avesta is the Veda, and not the Pahlavi language. They say that Sanskrit and Avesta are the echoes of one and the same voice, the reflex of one and the same thought, and therefore the Veda form the best lexicon and commentary to the Avesta. They have felt that SBE, Vol. 4 PTI, 2nd edition, PXXXIII. 24. The Parsi scriptures translating the Avesta in accordance with the Pahlavi is not really translating the Avesta, but only the Pahlavi version of it, which is found, wherever deciphered, to wander strangely from the true meaning of the original text, for tradition is wont to force the ideas of its own age into the books of past ages. The traditional school argue that translating Zand by means of Sanskrit, and Avesta by means of the Veda, is forgetting that relationship is not identity. And the Vedic language is quite unable to teach us what became in Persia of those elements which are common to the two systems. Further, that the comparative method when left to itself leads to wrong conclusions, e.g. the Zantnariga, which means a bird, would assume the meaning of gazelle, to accord with the Sanskrit Mrigya, and the demons, the Deva, would ascend from their dwelling in hell up to heaven to meet their philological brothers, the Indian Deva. The fact being that the traditional method starts from matters of fact, and moves always in the field of reality, while the comparative method starts from a hypothesis, moves in a vacuum, and builds up a fanciful religion and a fanciful language. What really is the case is as follows: tradition discovers and the Veda explains. The former made us acquainted with the nature of the old Iranian religion, by gathering together all its materials. The latter tried to explain its growth. Tradition is apt to lose sight of chronological order, and give place to logical order instead. Comparison is likely to exaggerate historical allusions from a want of discretion in judgment. But the question has been ably shown by Professor Darmstetter to be a much wider one than that of prehistoric times. In fact, he says, we find in the Avesta either polemics against, or loans from, the great contemporary systems, the Brahmanical, the Buddhist, the Greek, and the Jewish / these and SBE, Vol. 4, 2nd edition, Introd, PLI Origin of Zoroastrianism. 25 other elements which have found their way into, or are characteristic of the Avesta, will best be analyzed by a study of the theology and religious teachings of the sacred book itself. But before doing so, it will be well to establish some facts as to its origin and founder. 3. The origin and founder of the Zoroastrian religion. All antiquity, says de Harlez, Iranian as well as Greek, gives it as fact that a philosopher-priest, at an ancient date which is quite uncertain, reformed the creed and worship of Iranian peoples. History calls him Zoroaster. His existence up to the present day was never doubted. Even today the majority and the chief among Iranian scholars take him to have been a real person. Others, at the same time, would only have him pictured as a legendary being, representing the body of Mazdean priests. One has even transformed him into a god of storms. But it requires very strong proof to upset the unanimous voice of classical antiquity. On the whole, therefore, we take it that he actually existed. The age in which Zoroaster lived is by no means certain. After a close investigation of Oriental and Western writings, Geiger and Spiegel have been unable to determine the period accurately. For Oriental authorities are quite unreliable upon this point, for they say that Zoroaster belongs to the middle portion of the duration of the world since the creation of the human race, or 9,000 years after the creation of the world. They also state dogmatic ally that 1,000 years cannot yet have fully elapsed since his death, for otherwise a new prophet should have already appeared. Among Western writers, Xanthus of Sardis is said to have placed Zoroaster 600 years before the fall of Xerxes. In C. de Harlez, Avesta, Introd, p. 18. 26 Origin of Zoroastrianism. This case, he must have flourished about 1080 years before Christ. Eudoxus, Aristotle, and Hermodorus fix absurd dates, while Hermippus, Pliny, and Plutarch are just as indefinite. Berosus, Porphyrins, and Agathias are scarcely more trustworthy, and Suidas and Ctesias not reliable. Again, the birthplace and native country of Zoroaster are not decided upon. Ctesias has been followed by many other later historians in assigning Bactria as his native home. But a whole series of authorities look upon him as a Mede or a Persian. Amongst them is to be found Berosus, who held a great character for accuracy in ancient times. Turning to Oriental writers once again, they unanimously place Zoroaster in western Iran as his native land, but most of them state that he had worked for some time in Bactria. The Avesta speaks of him as the renowned in the Aryan home, wherever that may be. The Bundahayish definitely assigns his birthplace to be near the river Dargia, in the Aryan home. From the above conflicting statements we can only say that most writers try to place the native land of Zoroaster altogether in the west and not in the east, the Zoroastrian theology before Alexander the Great. We have historical evidence of some essential doctrines in Zoroastrianism, the existence of which can be traced back far beyond the Parthian period and the Greek conquest. One may with certain accuracy distinguish in the religion what is old, or pre-Alexandrian, or Achaemenian, from what is late, or post-Alexandrian, i.e. the belief in a supreme god, Ahura Mazda, who is the organizer of the world, is as old as anything we know about Persia. Darius proclaims Ahura Mazda, Spiegel, Age of the Avesta and Zoroaster, pages 8 AFFSBE, vol. 4, 2nd edition, pages 9 FF. Zoroastrian Theology 27. The greatest of all gods, a powerful God, who made this earth, who made that heaven, who made man, who made Darius king. 2. The gods invoked with the Persian Zeus, Ahura Mazda, are, according to Herodotus, the sun, the moon, the earth, the wind, the waters, that is to say, natural deities. The two greatest gods, next to him, according to Artaxerxes Memnon, are Mithra and Anahata, Anahita, that is to say, a god of the light, and a goddess of the waters. 3. The principal dualism is implied, in the time of Darius, by the great king stating that Ahura created welfare, Shiatime, for man, and in the time of Herodotus, by the religious war waged by the Magi against the ants, snakes, and other noxious creatures, which shows that the distinction of Ormazdian and Aromanian creatures was already in existence. Moreover, at the EAD of the Achaemenian period, Aristotle knows of a good spirit and the evil one, Zeus, Oromazdes, and Hades, Araomanios. For the existence of the world was limited to 12,000 years, distributed into 4 periods, the character of which was altered in the post-Alexandrian period, to humor the Neoplatonic tendencies of the age. It was already an established dogma that Ahriman would be conquered at last, and that men should live again. The belief in resurrection and a future life implies the correlative belief in future rewards and punishments, which was fully developed later on. Practical morality was already a trait in the national character. Truthfulness was considered a paramount virtue, the doctrine of the balance of merits and demerits was already known. The two greatest merits of a citizen in the days of Darius and Herodotus, as now, were the begetting and rearing of a numerous family, and the fruitful tilling of the soil. 28 Origin of Zoroastrianism 6. The worship of the elements water, fire, and earth and a respect for purity were practiced. For it was forbidden to sully the waters or the fire, to throw a corpse into the Andi, or to bury it in the earth until reduced to a fleshless, incorruptible skeleton. 7. Two sorts of sacrifice existed: the bloody sacrifice, as seen today in the Adishzor, and the bloodless sacrifice, consisting essentially of the haumo firing and libations, of which we have indirect evidence. The principles of the Achaemenian religion may be summed up as follows: I-dogmas, the existence of two conflicting supreme powers, one good and the other evil, Ormuzd and Ahriman, the final defeat of Ahriman after 12,000 years, and the resurrection, also a number of animistic deities, amongst which were Mithra and Anahita. 2 Morals, veneration of truth, family, and agriculture. 3 Liturgy, a bloody sacrifice and a bloodless sacrifice, Hauma, certain laws of purity extending to the waters, the fire, and the earth, burning and burying corpses forbidden. The Magi. This religion was practiced in the south as well as in the north of Iran, in Persia as well as in Media. It had its center in Media, and its sacerdotal class belonged to a Median tribe, the Magi. The priesthood was hereditary as it still is nowadays amongst the Parsi, and the Magi were to Mazdaism what the Levites and Kohanim were to Judaism. The sacerdotal tribe spread wherever Mazdaism extended, and in spite of the intense provincial hatred which the Persians bore to the Medians, still the Magi were, in the Persian idea, the only true, authorized priests. Ritual of the Zendavesta. 29 Aryan elements. Purely Aryan elements in the religion are, the Supreme God, the God of the heaven, Ahura Mazda, the God of the heavenly light, Mithra, the worship of the elementary divinities, waters, fire, and earth, a number of storm myths and mythical legends, and the worship of Hauma. Iranian elements. Purely Iranian elements are, the dualistic conception of the world, and its limited duration of 12,000 years with its 4 periods, the continual conflict of Ormuzd and Ahriman, and the latter's defeat, the resurrection of the dead, the notion of purity carried to the extreme, the prohibition of burning or burying the dead, and the throwing away of corpses to dogs and birds of prey. Some of the new dogmas may be the independent development of Aryan elements. For instance, the dualistic conception may have grown out of the mythical struggles between gods and demons. But the great year and the resurrection are things quite new, which seem to betray external influences. But whether these influences were Scythian or Chaldean it is difficult to decide. For the ritual of the Zendavesta. There are 4 leading features in the ritual of the Parsis, as outlined in the Avesta: the care of the sacred fire, special forms of prayer, offerings, and purification. There are 2 classes of fire temples, the 7 Adishbarams, and over 100 Adishadarans. There is no common worship, but the priests keep a continual watch over the sacred fire, so that it never goes out, feeding it with sandalwood and gum benzoin. 30 Ritual of the Zendavesta. This fire is kept in a shrine, within an outer court, where the people praying can always see its light, and it bums in a large urn on a stone altar. The priest sits within the shrine when praying, facing the fire and cross-legged, holding in his left hand the barsum, now made of silver rods. It is specially during the recitation of prayers that the barsum is used. These prayers are chanted at different times of the day, every portion having its allotted prayer. They are generally pronounced without being understood, because they are Zand prayers in the Gujarati character. As regards offerings, the old animal sacrifices of Achaemenian times have practically ceased, and even in the normal offering the flesh is no longer used and offered. The only part of the offering still observed is the libation of the sacred plant of Hauma, known to the Brahmin as Soma. It is pounded first in the sacred mortar, then the juice is collected in the sacred cup. When accompanied by proper prayers in the process of preparation, this liquid becomes endowed with almost divine attributes. Lastly, ceremonial purity is with the Parsi a matter of supreme importance, though the distinction between moral and ceremonial defilement is far from clear in the Avesta. The one is regarded as equally dreadful with the other, and as requiring equal expiation. The chief means of purification are water and gomez, or narang, which must be properly prepared and applied with prayers. As Ain Quitil tersely puts it, there is no purification, no purifier, no priest, and no Parsi. Every morning the Orthodox Parsi, with a view to purification, applies the narang to his face, hands, and feet. After saying his prayers, the liquid is even drunk on greater occasions, pomegranate leaves being chewed to banish the taste. The greatest of all purifications is the Barishnam, a ceremony which lasts in all for 9 nights, and always precedes the ordination of the priest. Zoroastrian ceremonies 31 birth, marriage, and burial ceremonies. 4 other ceremonies connected with the Parsi between birth and burial call for notice. To inculcate humility, a Parsi must be born on the ground floor, and washed with water before being considered pure. On the 7th day the astrologer is called in to name the child and divine his future. Nowadays at the age of 7, or later, the rite of initiation into Zoroastrianism takes place. It is accompanied by prayers, purifications, and the putting on of the kusti, or sacred cord of 72 threads, and the satara, or sacred shirt. These must be worn day and night without fail. At the age of 15 marriage is permitted, though earlier marriages are not at all infrequent. The priest is the matchmaker, and the astrologer fixes the day for marriage. Cloth and twist unite the couple, followed by prayers and the daster's blessing. Their home at first is with the bridegroom's father, and, unlike Hindu widows, Parsi widows are allowed to marry again. Lastly, in death and burial Parsi ceremonies are unique. Their sense of defilement through contact with anything dead has led to elaborate ceremonies. When a Parsi is dying, the priest repeats consoling texts from the Avesta, administers the sacred cup of Hauma, and prays for the forgiveness of his sins. After death, the body is removed to the ground floor and prepared for burial. Priestly exhortations then begin, during which a white dog, 4-eyed, is brought in to gaze upon the dead and thus expel the demon, and secure the passage of the soul over the Chinvat bridge to heaven. The same day the body is conveyed to the Tower of Escience, or Dakama, by a special class of Parsi. Within the Dakama the corpses are exposed to the birds of prey, till only the skeleton remains. This, 32 conquest of Persia grim practice is thus described in the Avesta in a golden light maker of the material world, Thou Holy One, whither shall we bring, where shall we lay the bones of the dead, Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda answered, the worshippers of Mazda shall erect a building out of the reach of the dog, of the fox, and of the wolf, and wherein rainwater cannot stay. Such a building shall they erect, if they can afford it, with stones, mortar, and earth. If they cannot afford it, they shall lay down the dead man on the ground, on his caipet and his pillow, clothed with the light of heaven, and beholding the sun, the Mohammedan conquest of Persia. The Sasanian dynasty was at the height of its power by the time the canon of the Avesta was closed, under Adarbad Marasband, in the reign of Shaptir II, 330 AD. It now remains for us to sketch the events that led the Parsi to migrate to India. We'll begin by describing how the kingdom of Persia passed into Arab hands. The first invasion began by order of Caliph Omar in 633 AD. But it was the great Arab victories at Qadisiyah, in that memorable year 637 AD, and Nahavand, probably 641 AD, that shattered the remains of the Sasanian Empire. When the country had been finally subjugated, the caliphate was established at Baghdad, and the nation was compelled by the soldiery of Omar to accept death or the Quran. 100,000 persons are said to have been forced daily to abjure the faith of their forefathers, and the fire temples and other sacred places were destroyed or converted into mosques. Under rulers carrying out this system without pity or remorse, almost the whole Zoroastrian population of Persia embraced the faith of Islam. Such of the followers of Zoroaster as obeyed the dictates of their conscience abandoned their homes and fled to the mountainous districts of Khorasan. SBE, Vol. 4 PTI pages 73, .-Vand% 6. 49 to 51 Emigration to India 33 For about 100 years they remained in Khorasan unmolested, but persecution at last reached them, and they were once more compelled to flee. Considerable number succeeded reaching the little island of Ormuz, at the entrance of the Persian Gulf. 1. Emigration to India. Then came the migration to India, first, so the story goes, by sea to Diu, off the south of the Kathiawar coast, then 19 years later to Sanjan, where they landed about the year 716 AD. Here the first fire temple was allowed to be built in India. Hence they are traced to Cambay, AD 943 to 997, and to Variaf about the same time, also to Surat and other places in the north, and Thana and Chaul in the south, of western India, also to the city of Navsari by 114 AD, and Anklesvar a century later. It was in the last named place that the Visparad is said to have been translated in 1258 AD. Mention is also made of a Dakama being built at Broch in 1309 AD. Travelers in India of the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries found the Parsi in many parts of the country. And we know that in the 14th century they were persecuted by the Mohammedans, and had to move their sacred fire from Sanjan to Navsari, which is now considered by them to be a very sacred spot. Not much can be chronicled during the centuries of Mohammedan supremacy, but we find them the Mughal city of Surat in 1478 AD, and can be fairly certain that they first arrived in Bombay shortly before the cession of the island to the British in 1668 AD. Population, mortality, and occupations. The last Indian census, of 1891, numbered the Parsi in India at 89,904, or an increase of a little over 5%, in 10 years. This represents about Dosab Hasarabji Karika, History of the Parsis, Vol. IP 22 FFC 34 Parsi costumes 1/3000th part of the entire population, but no less than 1/15th of the population of the city of Bombay. The great vitality of the nation is shown by the fact that Parsi families have the highest average number of children under 1 year of age. This will best be brought out by the comparative table below. Deer rate under Parsi sects 35 chocolate color, over the skull cap, unless he be a priest, and then he wears a white turban. He also wears an angraka, or loose overcoat, with very long sleeves that roll up above the wrist. For full dress he needs a jama or a long, double-breasted coat of cotton, and a piece of cloth, which is folded in bands, and passed again and again round the waist. This dress is worn at weddings, funerals, and on certain state occasions. The Parsi women wear similar underclothing to the men. But their sari or outer dress is composed of about 6 yards of bright-colored silk or satin. This is most gracefully arranged round the waist, limbs, and shoulders. Besides this, the old-fashioned kantri has been generally superseded by abatas made after the NHSH fashion. Everyone except a widow wears glass bangles, and until a generation or so ago nose rings were worn also. The old tradition that the head should be covered day and night is kept by the women wearing their mathatana, under uluch, for modesty's sake, all their hair is secreted. For the same reason the men always wear their skew caps. But every year Western ideas are prevailing more amongst them. Parsi sects and the calendar. The Parsi of India are divided into 2 sects, the Shehenshai and the Kadmai. They differ, not on questions of faith, but of chronology. Both have their own computation of the era of Yazd-Ezid, the last Sasanian king. The division amongst them arose in this way: the Parsi reckon a year to have 65 days, and a month 30 days, so that every year they add 5 days, or gatha, at the close. In order to make up the JH 54M, and so accord with the correct solar year, the ancient Persians are reported to have intercalated 1 month at the end of every Lao years. This intercalation is a 36 Parsi festivals called Kabaisa. Now the Persian Zoroastrians seem to have forgotten to make this intercalation after they lost the sovereignty of the land, and so when one Jamasp, a learned Persian Zoroastrian, arrived in Surat in 1090 AD to instruct the mobeds or priests, he discovered that his CO religionists in India were a month behind their brethren in Iran in commencing the new year. But it was not till 1746 AD that the Kadmai sect was formed to observe the same dates as the Persian Zoroastrians. The bulk of the people then became Shihanshai, and adhered to their old traditions. Quite an ardent controversy was then started, and not cleared up until Karsiji Istamji Kama published his work on the computation of the Yazdezerti era, in 1870. Though a Kadmai, he showed that both sects were curiously in the wrong, for the Kadmai erred in saying that intercalation was not enjoined by the Zoroastrian religion, and the Shihanshai were wrong, inasmuch as no intercalation had taken place, as they supposed, when the Parsi refugees were in Khorasan. A special feature about the Parsi calendar is the great stress laid upon the importance of each day for different things. For instance, the first day of the month is the right day to enter a new house or garden. Other days are best for a journey or a voyage, others for social gatherings, while some are reserved for rest and pious contemplation. But it is not necessary to add that the Parsi no longer follow the above precepts as laid down by the fertile brain of Adarbad. Festivals. There are several Parsi festivals still widely observed. Perhaps the most appreciated of all is the Paiteti holiday. Paiteti, or New Year's Day, is the day of one Dosabai Sarabji Karika, Ris Uri of the Parsis, Vol. ICHIU. Pages 133-143 Parsi Law 37 Ahura Mazda in the month of Frabardan, which should properly be called Naoraz. Bapithvan is the third day of the first month, and originally was intended to announce the commencement of summer. Khordad Lal marks the anniversary of the birth of their prophet Zoroaster. Besides these and other holidays, there are the 6 Gahambar, or days of rest. The Zoroastrian theory that the world was created in 365 days, at 6 unequal intervals, has occasioned the observance of the Gahambar. The good old custom of rich and poor, high and low, partaking of food together and uniting in prayers, is still observed at these times. Parsi law and government. There is no record of the laws by which the Parsi were first governed when they arrived in India. But journeys were subsequently made to Persia, with the result that the Ardaviraf Nama, the Vistaspiast, and the Visparad were brought back from Persia, and long acted as guides on religious and social questions. A properly constituted Panchayat was first formed in Bombay soon after the island passed into British hands. In religious matters the priests of Navsari did and still do hold their own, but civil disputes were all settled by this court of justice. Its decision was considered as final. But this state of things only lasted till the middle of the 18th century, when it was further decided by the British governor, owing to pending troubles, that the Panchayat should form a General Assembly of the Parsi. During the lifetime of the first appointed members the assembly was very powerful, but then it gradually declined and fell into contempt. Again it regained its power, and again it declined, chiefly owing to the injustice of having one law for the rich and another for the poor. Its 38 Parsi law only function now consists in being trustee to certain Parsi charitable funds. For some time the Parsi remained with no code of laws, but merely subject to the common Hindu law, to which they had subscribed on their first landing at Sanjan centuries ago. But a Parsi law commission was established, and finally succeeded in securing laws for the Parsi from the British government. Chapter 2 The Jaina be that hateth his life, **** world shm keep it unto life eternal. St. John, 12:25 Their present extent and social importance. Discovery of their origin. Mahafivara, the 24th Jailna Mahavira, a contemporary and rival to Buddha, parallels and contrasts the influence of Gosala Brahmanism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Their relationship. Jainism not a Buddhist sect. Jaina, Buddhist, and Brahman vows. Compare Jainism, a development of Brahmanism, the institution of the fourth ashram of views on the Atman. 2. Authenticity of Jaina tradition. The Muttara inscriptions. The age of Jaina literature. Date of Devardhai and the Jaina canon. Date of composition of the Siddhanta. Tests of scientific knowledge, high language and spelling of the texts, and by the meters used. Works older than the existing canon. The Purva contents of the Siddhanta. 3. Antiquity of Jaina philosophy. Early Jaina doctrines, the eternity of Atman, the Kriyavada, the annihilation of Karman, the three Danda, the doctrine of Katu Yamasamvarasamvyudo. Early religious practices of Nigantha. Leading Jaina doctrines of today. Jiva and Ajilva Moksha. The Jaina worship and temples. The Jaina of today. The Jaina, who are the most numerous and influential sect of nonconformists to the Brahmanical system of Hinduism, now number about 1,400,000 in India. They are found in every province of Upper Hindustan, in the cities along the Ganges, and in Calcutta. But they are more numerous to the west, e.g. in Rajputana, Gujarat, and in the upper part of the Malabar coast. They are also scattered throughout 40 the Jaina, the whole of southern India. Being mostly traders, merchants, or bankers, they live in the towns, and the wealth of many of their community gives them a social importance greater than would result from their mere numbers. It is even said that half the mercantile transactions of India pass through their hands. Their charity is boundless, and they form the chief supporters of the beast hospitals, which the old and striking animistic tenderness for animals has left in many of the cities of India. Discovery of their origin. Until quite recently, European scholars did not admit the pretensions of the Jaina to an earlier origin than Buddhism. H. Wilson questioned their importance at any period earlier than 12 centuries ago. Weber used to regard the Jaina as merely one of the oldest sects of Buddhism *, and Lassen believed that they had branched off from the Buddhists. M. Barth, after discussion of the evidence, still thought that we must regard the Jaina as a sect which took its rise in Buddhism. On the other hand, Oldenburg, who brings later light from the Pali texts to bear on the question, accepts the identity of the Jaina sect with the Nigantha, into whose midst the younger brotherhood of Buddha entered. The learned Jacobi has now investigated the question from the Jaina texts themselves. Oldenburg had proved, out of the Buddhist scriptures, that Buddhism was a true product of Brahman doctrine and discipline. Jacobi shows that both Buddhism and Jainism must be regarded as religions. Developed essays and leet years on the Belgium of the Sindh, by H. Wilson. Dr. Keenhold Costs edition, 1862, vol. IP 339. Weber's Indisk Study N, 16. 210 Lassen's Indisk A Yurthumskunda, 4. 763 FF * Earth's Belligeons of India, ed. 1882, p. 151. Degree Buddha, His Life, His Doctrine, His Order, by Professor H. Oldenburg. Mahavira 41 out of Brahmanism, not by a sudden reformation, but prepared by a religious movement going on for a long time. And he has brought forward evidence for believing that Jainism was the earlier outgrowth of the two, evidence which will be more fully discussed later on. He holds that the religion of the Jaina was probably founded by Parsvanath, now revered as the 23rd Jaina, and merely reformed by Mahavira, the contemporary of Buddha. Following the line of argument that Professor Jacobi has adopted, except where it appears to be somewhat inadequate, we come first to the claims of Mahavira to be the founder of Jainism and a contemporary of Buddha. Mahavira, the 24th Jaina. It is now recognized by all scholars that Nataputa, who is commonly called Mahavira or Vardhamana, was a historical person and a contemporary of Sakyamuni, the Buddha, and that the religion of Jainism which he founded is as old as Buddhism. In fact, both took their rise in that wonderful era of religious speculation upon the ultimate problems of life, about the 6th century before Christ, and we would remark that in no other age and country do we find diffused among all classes of people so earnest a spirit of inquiry, so impartial and deep a respect for all who came forward as teachers, however contradictory their doctrines might be. We see then at once that it is most important to compare Mahavira with Buddha, and Buddhism with Jainism, in order to see whether they borrowed any of their teachings from each other, or derived their doctrines, their orders, and their speculations from a common source. In any case, it will be well to note how it was that Buddhism proved more adaptable and appealed to more widespread sympathies, till it surpassed and overshadowed Jainism. Still more 42 the Jaina. Interesting to trace the cause of the survival of the latter in British India today, while the former has long been extinct. Mahavira and Buddha. The chief points of resemblance between the respective founders of these religions were these: both were ascetics. 2. Mahavira had relations with the same names as those of Buddha, both leaders being of the Kshatriya caste. 3. Both disregarded the authority of the Brahmins in religious matters. But their differences were far more characteristic than their apparent resemblance, of which so much used to be made. For we read of Buddha as being born in Kapuavastu in the kingdom of Magadha at the foot of the Himalaya. But Mahavira was the son of one king Siddhanta of Kundagrama, not far from Vaisali. And Buddha's mother died directly after his birth, but the parents of Mahavira lived until he was grown up. Again, amid the halo of legends that gathered about Buddha's life, we are probably right in saying that he who turned an ascetic against his father's will has not been touched by the story of the foresights which powerfully affected him, and actually decided his future course. The first object was a decrepit old man. This led him to reflect on the miseries of old age. He next passed a wretched leper, covered with sores. Here Gautama's thoughts glanced off to the manifold forms of disease and suffering with which the world abounds. The next object which crossed his path was a dead body, and this, said he, is the end to which I and all must come. Anon, another object presented itself to him. He beheld a recluse sitting wrapped in meditation. That, said he to himself, is the only course for me to pursue. That very night did he quit his home. Not so with Mahavira, SBE, Vol. XXII, O Anasutras, PTIP 13s Mahavira 43 for he waited until his father's death, and then went into retirement with the consent of those in power. But the striking parallels and contrasts go further than this. Whereas Buddha led a life of austerities for 6 years, Mahavira persevered for 12, and even afterwards, when he became a Tirthakara, he was still convinced of the necessity of asceticism, whereas Buddha looked upon those 6 years as wasted time. Thus, after a lifetime of mutual rivalry, Mahavira is said to have died at Papa, leaving Buddha the advantage of preaching and teaching for many years after, until his touching death at Kusinagara when 80 years of age. Mahavira, like Buddha, was a member of a feudal aristocracy, whose family ties were strong and long we remembered. Know, too, for certain, that Buddha addressed himself chiefly to members of the aristocracy, and the Jaina originally preferred the Kshatriya to the Brahmins. Therefore it is evident that both Buddha and Mahavira made use of their families to propagate their order, which partly accounts for their prevalence at the time over rival sects. Then when it is remembered that the kingdom of Magadha was extended under Agasatru, son of Bambisara, who figures largely in the life of Buddha extended so as to include Vaisal, and the birthplace of Mahavira, we see that the foundations were laid of an empire, which facilitated the rapid spread both of Jainism and Buddhism. A few other points about the founder of Jainism are worthy of notice. After he had spent his 12 years in austerities, during 11 of which he seems to have gone about naked, he became omniscient, and a prophet of the Jaina, called a Tirthakara. Several other titles were then given him, such as Jina, Mahavira, and Si, as with Sakyamuni. Then for 30 years he taught his religious system and organized *SBE, Vol. XXI, PTIP 14. 44 The Jaina his order of ascetics, under the patronage of the three kings of Videha, Magadha, and Anga. His travels extended west to Sravasti and north to the foot of the Himalaya. His disciples, or apostles of the Jaina, were 11 in number, and are detailed in the Kalpa Sutra. This list, we have reason to believe, is accurate, since it is given without variation by both sects of the Jaina. Lastly, we have the double testimony of both Jaina and Buddhist canons that Nataputa, as he is always called by the Buddhists, was a contemporary of Buddha, and that his followers in Vaisali were numerous. The influence of Gosla on Madhvara's Bhaktraniya. The Bhagavati states that Gosala, the son of Makhali, after 6 years of asceticism with Mahavira as his disciple, separated from him and started a_law of his own, and set up Ajina, the leader of the Ajivika. The Buddhists claim Gosala as coming from a long-established order of monks. Jacobi thinks that Mahavira and Gosala associated with the intention of combining their sects and fusing them into one. This does not seem conclusive. His reasons are, I. Their long life together presupposes similarity of opinions, a. The visions of animals, and of mankind, into 6 classes are common to both, 3. The rules of conduct prove almost conclusively that Mahavira borrowed them from Gosala. Certainly Mahavira's position was strengthened by his temporary association with Gosala, though, if we believe the Jaina, Gosala himself lost by it, and came to a tragic end. Boardmanism, Buddhism, and Jainism. We have already mentioned that it has been generally believed, even by many scholars, that Jainism is a branch of Buddhism. Let us now XSBE, Vol. XXIIPTIPIVI. Ibid, Vol. XLVPTIL. P. Brahmanism, Buddhism, and Jainism 45. I mean the 4 points of coincidence which Professor Lassen adduced to prove this point. Both sects give the same titles and epithets to their prophets, e.g. Jina, Arhat, Mahavira, Sarvanya, Shugata, Tathagata, Siddha, Buddha, Sambuddha, Panhivrita, Mutta. To this it has been well replied that probably all were honorific adjectives and substantives applicable to persons of exalted virtue. For instance, even today in Jaina writings, Buddha means Mutta, or liberated soul, and yet it was taken by the Buddhists as a title for Gautama. And to go further, Tirthakara, which means prophet with the Jaina, is used of the founder of a heretical sect by the Buddhists. The more natural conclusion, therefore, to arrive at is that Buddhists were opponents of Jaina when they formed their terminology, and not vice versa. 2. Both sects now worship mortal men, their prophets, as gods, and erect statues of them in their temples. But, we answer, this worship had nothing to do with Buddhism or Jainism originally, nor did it originate with the Yatai or monks, but with the Sravaki or laymen of the community. The religious development of the people in India had come to find in Bhakti the supreme means of salvation, and so Professor Jacobi thinks that both sects came to adopt this practice, independently, under the continuous and irresistible religious tendencies at work in those times. 3. Both sects measure the history of the world by enormous periods of time, which bewilder and awe even the most imaginative fancy. But so does the Brahman. In fact, there is as much difference between Buddhist and Jaina chronology as Indisk Altar Thumbskunda, 4. 763 ff 46 the Jaina between Buddhist and Brahman. A study of the 3 systems seems to show that while the Buddhists have improved on the Brahman system of the Yuga, the Jaina invented their Utsarpini and Avasarpini eras after the model of the day and night of Brahma. In this case, therefore, the Jaina outdo the Buddhists. 4. Both sects lay stress on the ahimsa or not killing of living things. This point refers to only one of the 5 vows of the Jaina and Buddhists, which have so much in common. It would be best, therefore, to compare these vows with one another, as Professor Weber has done, and underneath to place the first 5 of the 10 obligations of the Brahman ascetics, as drawn up by Professor Windisch. The 5 Jaina vows in order. Ahimsa, not to destroy life. Sunrita, not to liastia, not to take that which is not given. Brahmacharya, to abstain from sexual intercourse. Aparigraha, to renounce all interest in worldly things, and to call nothing one's own. The 5 Buddhist precepts. 1 should not destroy life, 1 should not take that which is not given. 1 should not tell lies. 1 should not become a drinker of intoxicants, 1 should refrain from unlawful sexual intercourse, an ignoble thing / the 5 vows of the Brahman ascetics. Abstention from injuring living beings. Truthfulness. Abstention from appropriating the property of others. Continence. Liberality / note the change in order. The fifth vow differs in each case, liberality not being possible for mendicants. Jaina vows 47. A mere glance at the above triple group of vows is enough to convince any candid inquirer that there is quite as much reason to suppose that Jaina vows are deducible from those of Brahmin ascetics already in use, as that Buddhism is the source. It is still more obvious when the precepts and rules of the Brahmin ascetics, as in Bodhayana, are arranged alongside of those of the Jaina monks. They have much the same outfit. Both carry a cloth for straining water, and both perform purifications with water when taken out of a tank and strained. The Brahmin broom has its counterpart in the grasses with which the Jainas sweep the road, where they walk and sit, in order to remove insects. While the stick and the rope belonging to the alms bowl, and the water vessel are the invariable accompaniments of each. In fact, the only speciality of the Jaina is their filter for the mouth, which they call mukhabastrika. On the whole, therefore, the Jaina were fitted out very much like their Brahmin models, the Samnyasin, or Bhikshu. They have more vows in common with the Brahmins than the Buddhists, and several precepts in common with Brahmin ascetics. There is still another question to decide. Did the Jaina monk copy from the Brahmin ascetic, or vice versa? That the former is the case has overwhelming evidence. For, putting aside for a moment the claims of the Samnyasin to be part of the ashrama, which are probably as old as Brahmanism itself, we find traces of Brahmin ascetics all over India, at a time when Buddhism was only 800 years old, and still exercising merely a local influence. Therefore it is difficult to conceive how all the Samnyasin could have been taken from the Buddhists. But still more conclusive is the argument from the date of Gautama, the lawgiver. For Professor Buhler puts down Bodhayana as of a much older date than the Apastamba, which we know was written in the * Sacred Laws of the Aryas, PTI Introduction, P. Slyin. 48. The Jaina 4th or 5th century BC. But Gautama was older than either of these, and yet in his day he taught the complete system of Brahmin asceticism. What then gave rise to the monastic orders of Jaina and Buddhists? It must be remembered that though these orders were copied, as we have seen, from the Brahmins, they were distinctly intended for the Kshatriya caste, of whom both Mahavira and Buddha were members. This is proved by a curious wend about the transfer of the embryo of Mahavira from the womb of a Brahmanel to that of a Kshatriyani. For it was alleged that no other caste was worthy to bring forth a Tirthakara. Now it was only natural that Brahmin ascetics should not regard these Feo ascetics as quite their equals, however orthodox they might be, and that further separation between them should ensue, when it came to be held that the Brahmin was entitled to enter the fourth ashrama, or stage, the Kshatriya only 3, the citizen 2, and the Sudra 1. Remark of Vaisishtha throws light upon this tendency to descent, when he deplores the fact that non-Brahmin ascetics had ceased from reciting the Veda, and hence were neglecting revelation. We can be safe in saying that the beginnings of dissenting sects like the Jaina and Buddhists arose out of the institution of the fourth ashrama. But there were other differences of belief taking shape in this age of inquiry too. The Brahmin philosophy of the Atman, or universal soul, was being disputed. And while the Jaina held to the orthodox belief in the absolute and permanent soul with but one difference, that they ascribed to the Atman a limited space, Buddha went further. The very first sermon which he preached to his first converts, was a discourse on the absence of any sign of soul, in any of all the constituent elements of individual life. SBE, Vol. XXII pages XXIXFFCFP 58. T.W. B. Davids, Buddhism, Its History and Literature, p. 39. Jaina Tradition 49. At length, therefore, we have arrived at some conclusions about the relationships between Brahmanism, Buddhism, and Jainism, and it will be well here to summarize them. First, that which Buddhists and Jaina have in common, comes in every case from older Brahmin sources. Second, in fundamental points the Buddhists and the Jaina are at variance. Third, Mahavira and Buddha were undoubtedly contemporaries one of another. 2. The authenticity of Jaina tradition. The above discussion has, however, been conducted on the supposition that the tradition of the Jaina as contained in their sacred books may on the whole be credited. But the intrinsic value of this tradition has been called into question by M. Barth, who is a scholar of cautious judgment. In his opinion, the direct tradition of peculiar doctrines and records had not yet been demonstrated, and he would seem when he wrote to assume that the Jaina must have been careless in handing down their sacred lore. Professor Weber also concludes the introduction to his recent work by saying, "Personally, I still continue to regard the Jaina as one of the oldest of the Buddhist sects." A conclusive answer then must be given, before proceeding further, to the question, was the cultivation of the sacred text altogether abandoned in the interval between the days of Mahavira and the redaction of the canon in 454 AD? In answer to Barth's doubts about the authenticity of Jaina traditions, Jacobi admits that the Jaina sect may have been for a long time small and unimportant, but contends that small sects, like the Jews and the Parsi, Barth, the religions of India, ch. 4, 1882 ed. Weber, Sword Literature 0/The Jains, PLAD 50. The Jaina often do preserve their doctrines and traditions with great pertinacity, and better than larger religious communities. He points out that the trifling differences in doctrines and usages which caused the various schisms in the Jaina body, indicate that they were most particular about their tenets, and that the detailed list of teachers and schools in the Stavravala of the Kalpasutra, which cannot be a pure fabrication, shows the interest taken in the preservation of records. With respect to the sacred books of the Svetambara, he rejects a portion of the tradition, which says that Devardhai in the 5th or 6th century caused the Siddhanta to be written in books, and introduced the use of manuscripts in the instruction of pupils and laymen. He takes only the latter statement to be true, and assumes that manuscripts of the Anga and other sacred works did exist at an earlier period, because it is hardly credible that the Jaina monks should never before have attempted to write down what they had to commit to memory. There is only one important point on which Jacobi's answer is incomplete. It furnishes no instance in which the tradition of the Jaina is proved to be trustworthy by independent, really historical sources. This led Professor Byler to enter on a careful re-examination of all the ancient historical documents which refer to the Jaina. The result has been that he has succeeded in proving the correctness of a great part of the larger list of teachers and schools, preserved in the Stavravala of the Kalpasutra. The historical documents corroborated are the well-known Mutra inscriptions, published in Sir A. Cunningham's Archaeological Reports, Vol. 3 p. 31 ff, plates 13-15. SBE, Toll. XXII, O Anasutra, PTIPXXXVIII. They not only mention the division of the Jaina monks into schools, lines of teachers, and branches, but contain the names of 9 Gana, Tula, and Eska, and of one teacher mentioned in the Kalpasutra, the Mutra inscriptions 51. These inscriptions bear the date of the era of Indo-Scythian kings over northwestern India, e.g. Kanishka, and those scholars are not quite agreed as to when to fix the beginning of this era. One of the latest dates assigned for Kanishka's accession to the throne is the year 78 to 79 AD. The dialect in which they are written shows that curious mixture of Sanskrit and Prakrit which is found in the Gatha of the northern Buddhists. From them we also learn that the Jaina monks of Mathura formed, between 83 and 167 AD, an order of a hierarchy, which was divided into several schools, each of which counted several subdivisions. Most of the persons named receive the title Vidchaka, or preacher, which is still very commonly given to those ascetics who are considered fit to expound the sacred books to laymen and pupils. One, however, is styled Gavin, chief of a school, a somewhat higher title, which even today is conferred on an eminent sadhu. Among the schools the Kodakagana shows that it had had a long history, and may safely be considered as having been founded at least a century before the beginning of our era. The existence, therefore, of titles like Vidchaka and Ganan, and of ancient schools at the end of the 1st century AD, shows that the Jaina sect had possessed already for a long time a continuous and self-conscious existence. The inscriptions further prove that the great schism which divided the Jaina into two hostile sections took place, not as modem tradition asserts, in 609 after Vera, but long before the beginning of our era, thus confirming Jacobi's view already put forward. In this way the gap of 10 centuries which exists between Vardhamana and Devardhai is almost filled up by continuous Jaina tradition. The 2 centuries during which alone no tradition is preserved are thought, by Jacobi, to have been filled up by the use of the 14 Purva, of which more will be said later on. Vienna Oriental Jamal, 1887, vol. I pages 169, 179 to 180. D2, 52 The Jaina, the age of extant Jaina literature. The Jaina canon, or Siddhanta, was drawn up at the Council of Vallabhai, under the presidency of Devardhai. This date corresponds either to 4,54 or 467 AD, and is incorporated into the Kalpasuyatra, 148. Devardhai Ganon, says the tradition, perceiving the Siddhanta in danger of becoming extinct, caused it to be written in books. In olden times it had been the custom of the Brahmins, and hence of the Buddhists and Jaina, to rely on the memory more than on MSS. How early these manuscripts were first written we do not know, for no mention is made of them, but it is very likely that as soon as they settled in Upasraya exclusively belonging to themselves, they began to keep them as they do now. If this view be correct, Devardhai arranged the already existing manuscripts in a canon, taking down from the mouth of learned theologians only such works as had not available manuscripts. Then a great many copies were made, in order to furnish every seminary with books. In this way any single passage in a sacred text may have been introduced by the editor, and all we can say with certainty is that the bulk of the Siddhanta is not of his making. What can be ascertained about the date of composition of the sacred books? There is no proof at all events that the first Tirthakara was the revealer of their contents, though this is a dogmatic theory of the Jaina. But we have 3 methods by which to determine the latest date to which they may be assigned, the tests of scientific knowledge, of language, and of meters used. For instance, no traces of the elements of Greek astronomy can be found in the Siddhanta, and we know that these were introduced into India in the 4th century of our era. Evidently the Jaina scriptures must have all been composed before then. The language too would give Jaina literature 53 a perfect clue, if it were not that books may have been handed down, not in the language of composition, nor in that of pronunciation. Jacobi thinks that the language has been modernized, for the same word is not always spelt the same way in Jaina texts and MSS. It would be quite impossible, therefore, to restore Devardhai's recension. But there are other differences between the original and present Siddhanta text. Weber speaks of lost passages which were extant at the date of the older commentaries, but also large interpolations which are apparent, and furthermore the text has even suffered complete transformations. He attributes these changes, and the loss of the entire Drishtavada, to the influence of the orthodox sect of Svetambara, to whom the present Siddhanta exclusively belongs. Probably we must regard these methods of spelling as historical, that is, all spellings were treated as authentic, and so were preserved. If this assumption is correct, the most archaic spelling represents pronunciation near the time of composition, while modem spelling dates back to the period shortly before the redaction of the canon took place. Using this proposition, and comparing the Jaina Prakrit in its oldest form with Pali texts on the one side, and later Prakrits on the other, we are led to the conclusion that the sacred books of the Jaina approximate more in point of time to the southern Buddhists than to later Prakrit writers. An examination of the meters in use is a still safer guide. What do we find? It will be sufficient for the sake of example to take the Vedaliya, Trishtubh, and Arya meters and discuss their use. We note then that the Jaina Sutra Kritanga Sutra has a whole lesson in the Vedaliya meter, that Pali verses of the southern Buddhists and Sanskrit literature of the northern Buddhists also use the meter, Vaber Sakrit Literayur, J.F. The Jains, translated by Dr. A. W. Smith, 1893, p. 854. The Jaina, and further, that the Dhammapadam, of the southern Buddhists, is written in an older style, whereas the Lalita Vistara, of the northern Buddhists, is more we modern in point of development. Conclude, therefore, that this one lesson in the Sutra Kritanga dates back to a period between the versifications of the southern and northern Buddhists. Take the area meter also as a confirmation of the above proof, and the Dhammapadam, which is composed in ancient Pali, will be found to contain no such verses. Then notice that the Sutra Kritanga, just as we should expect if it is dated as we have suggested above, contains a whole lecture in an old form of area, and the later the period the more common the area meter, till it is found not only in the younger parts of the Siddhanta, and in Brahman literature, whether in Prakrit or Sanskrit, but also in the works of the northern Buddhists, e.g. the Lalita Vistara. Lastly, the form of the Trishtubha meter in ancient Jaina works is younger than that in the Pali literature and older than that in the Lalita Vistara. All three cases then it appears that the Gatha of the Lalita Vistara are more modern than those in the Jaina Siddhanta. Hence Jacobi puts down the chronological position of the oldest parts of the Jaina literature as intermediate between the Pali and the Lalita Vistara. We have seen that the date of the oldest works in the Jaina canon makes them older than the Gatha of the Lalita Vistara. What date are we to assign to the latter? Know that it is said to have been translated into Chinese in 65 AD. Therefore extant Jaina literature must all be placed earlier than our era. Again, from the close comparison of Pali, Jaina, and later Prakrits, it has been shown that Jaina literature resembles that of the southern more than that of the northern Buddhists. Compare this with Max Miller's conclusion to his discussion on Jaina literature 55, the point when he fixes the latest date of a Buddhist canon at the time of the Second Council, 377 BC, and it will be seen that the whole of the Jaina Siddhanta was composed after the 4th century BC, and e4 the Christian era. It is interesting then to notice that the traditions of the Svetambara agree fairly well with this independent reasoning. For they say that their Anga were brought together at the time when Chandragupta was on the throne. And this date is given by Max Miller as 315 to 391 BC, and by Westergaard and Kern as 330 BC. Therefore the composition of the Jaina canon would fall somewhere between the end of the 4th and beginning of the 3rd century BC. Both sects of the Jaina attribute the collection of works to Bhadrabahua, works older than the existing canon. Besides the Jaina scriptures, the Svetambara and Digambara speak of some older works called Purva, as well as the Anga. There were said to be 14 of these, but in time the knowledge of them was lost, and they became totally extinct. The Svetambara hold that these 14 Purva were incorporated in the 12th Anga, the Drishtavada, which was lost before the 1000th year of their era, i.e. before the redaction under Devardhai. Anyhow a detailed Akoimt, or table of contents, is found in the 4th Anga, the Samavayanga, and in the Nandi Sutra. There are two reasons for believing that this tradition is correct. First, the word Purva means former, and second, the Anga do not derive their authority from the Purva, and there would be no need to fabricate the idea. How then was it that the Purva were superseded by a new canon? Weber thinks that the Svetambara lost the Drishtavada, because they had begun so to differ from the tenets of the book that the Purva, 56 the Jaina fell into neglect. Jacobi holds that the Purva were probably only of temporary value, and contained accounts of philosophical controversies held between Mahavira and his rivals. The title Pravada which is added to the name of every Purva seems to underscore this view. Whereas if the Svetambara be accused of losing the Purva, the Digambara seem to have lost their Anga as well within the first 2 centuries after the Nirvajya. In this case the neglect of the Purva was due, not so much to any direct intention, as to the fact that the new canon set forth the Jaina doctrines in a clearer light. Contents of the Siddhanta. What then was the canon of the Jaina scriptures which Devardhai compiled? The Siddhanta, as we now have it, is divided into 45 Agama, in 6 groups, several of the texts of the Agama having distinct names as authors. There are, I11 Anga, 212 Apanga, 310 Pana, 46 Chita, V2 Sutra, Nandi and Anui's Jadvara, 6 Formula Sutra, Weber has shown that the oldest portions of their literature are in reality nothing but disjective et nhra, that they are very unequal, and, as regards the date of their composition, separated from each other by extensive periods. Yet he admits that a hand, aiming at unification and order, has been brought to bear especially upon the Anga and Upanga. Jacobi also considers that the redaction of the Anga took place early, and tradition places the event under Badrabahu. Indisk Sudim, 16. p. 248. Jaina Philosophy 57-3. The Antiquity of Jaina Philosophy. When we come to consider how old Jaina doctrines are, and compare them with that of other schools of thought in India, we jbnd that Jaina ethics are generally based on primitive ideas. As illustrations of these notions, nearly everything is possessed of a soul. Not only have plants their own souls, but particles of earth, cold water, fire, and wind also. Now ethnology teaches us that animism is the basis of many beliefs that have been called the philosophy of savages, and that when civilization advances, some kind of anthropomorphism takes its place. Therefore it is natural to conclude that animistic beliefs must have been fairly prevalent, in large classes of Indian society, when Jainism first took its rise. And since this must have happened at an early date, it points to the antiquity of Jaina philosophy. Another mark Jainism has in common with the oldest Brahmin philosophies, Vedanta and Sankhya. The category of quality is not yet clearly and distinctly conceived, but is just evolving out of the category of substance. That is to say, things which we recognize as qualities are constantly mistaken for and mixed up with substances. For instance, the sutra rarely use the expression guna, or qualities, but more modern books regularly do so, showing the idea to be a later innovation. Again, the terms dharma and adharma, merit and demerit, are treated of as kinds of substances with which the soul comes in contact. Now Professor Oldenburg has pointed out that this was distinctly a primitive conception of the Vedic Hindu, and such a confusion of ideas would never have occurred at a later period. *SBE, Vol. XLVPXXXII. Degree Ibid, PXXXIII. The Jaina. Some early Jaina doctrines. Have we any means of discovering what was the teaching of early days, and whether it corresponded with the doctrines of Mahavira? It will be admitted, from what has been said above, that the Nigantha or Nirgrantha, now better known as Jaina or Arhata, already existed as an important sect when the Buddhist church was being founded. In order, therefore, to come to a solution of the above question, perhaps it will be best to take from published Buddhist and Jaina works, as the oldest witnesses that we can summon, available information about the Nigantha, their doctrines and religious practices /I. The eternity of Atman. There were at the time of the Buddhists and Jaina several other schools of philosophy, whom they each called heretics. And it will not be out of place to mention what were their theories about Atman, the soul, or as Professor Max Miller prefers to translate it, the self. First, there were three materialist schools, the one contending that the body and the soul are one and the same, the second, that the five elements are eternal and constitute everything, as in the following lines: man, Purusho, consists of four elements. When he dies, earth returns to earth, water to water, fire to fire, wind to wind, and the organs of sense merge into air, or space jail kesa. The third school was a variety of the second, and is thus described. Some say that there are five elements and the soul is sixth, substance, but they contend that the soul and the world, i.e. the fire elements, are eternal. These, six substances, do not perish neither, without nor with a cause. The non-existent does not come into existence, but all things are eternal by their very nature. Of SBE, Vol. XLV, Satritranga, 2. I, 20-23. SBE, Ibid, I1, 15, 16. Jaina Philosophy 59. Then we find a fourth school of fatalists described as saying, but misery, and pleasure, is not caused by the souls themselves. How could it be caused by other, agents, as time and sea. Pleasure and misery, final beatitude, and temporal, pleasure and pain, are not caused by the souls themselves, nor by others, but the individual souls experience them. It is the lot assigned them by destiny. Lastly, 4 schools of agnostics are given us: Kriyavada, Akriyavada, Agnanavada, and Vimayakavada. All these were considered by the Jaina as heretical. These agnostics, or Agnanika, negatived all modes of expression of the existence or non-existence of a thing, if it were anything transcendental or beyond human experience. And yet there is little doubt that Mahavira owed some of his conceptions to these very heretics, and formulated others under the influences of the day. For instance, the doctrine of Syadvada is identically the same as the Saptabhanganaya of the Jaina. It was an ingenious way out of the maze of the Agnanavada assertions about existence and non-existence. Amidst all these conflicting views of the soul, Mahavira kept to the old Brahman idea of the Atman. He held that it was eternal, but that the Atman have only a limited space, instead of being so extensive with the universe. To the Kriyavada, or the doctrine which teaches that the soul acts or is affected by acts. There is a story told of Siha, the general, a lay disciple of Nataputa, in the 6th Khandaka of the Mahavagga. He wanted to pay Buddha a visit, and went to ask Nataputa's leave. This was Nataputa's answer: "Why should you, Siha, who believe in the result of actions, according to their moral merit, go to visit the Samamagatama, who denies the result of actions? He teaches the doctrine of non-action, and in this doctrine he trains his disciples." SBE, Sutrakritenga, II, 3. Cf. what Mahavira taught about the Kriyavada himself lower down. 6. The Jaina. This doctrine of Kriyavada was opposed by Buddha's bold teaching about Akriyavada, which said that the soul does not exist, or that it does not act, or is not affected by acts. Here we recognize the teaching of the different schools of materialists, and in the Brahman philosophy of the Vedanta, Sankhya, and Yoga schools of thought. Mahavira, on the other hand, agreed with the Vaishshika and Nyaya schools of Brahman philosophy. 3. Annihilation of Karman. The teaching of Nigantha Nataputa on this point is thus described by Abhaya, a learned Buddhist. He teaches the annihilation, by austerities, of the old Karman, and the prevention, by inactivity, of new Karman. When Karman ceases, misery ceases; when misery ceases, perception ceases; when perception ceases, every misery will come to an end. In this way a man is saved by pure annihilation of sin, nigara, which is really effective. Very similar is the doctrine of the later books of the Siddhanta. By austerities he cuts off Karman. By renouncing activity he obtains inactivity; by ceasing to act he acquires no new Karman, and destroys the Karman he had acquired before. Karman is the root of birth and death they call misery. A man who is indifferent to the object of the senses, and to the other feelings of the mind, is free from sorrows. Though still in the samsara, he is not afflicted by that long succession of pains, just as the leaf of the lotus is not moistened by water. For the 3 Bandha, danda being a word meaning punishment. Nigantha Upali, who like Siha was converted to Buddha's teaching, tells us that there are 3 danda: the danda of the body, that of the speech, and that of the mind. This is almost identical with the Jaina doctrine. For we are told that Nataputa also declared that there were 3 danda or agents for the commission of sin, and that the acts of the Anguttara Nikaya, 3. 74 SBE, Vol. XLVP 15, and Vitarad Hyayana, Lex ZX. 27, 37, 71. 73 W Ibid, XXXII. 7, 34, 47, and see Jaina Philosophy 61 Bodhikaya, of the speech, Vach, and of the mind, Mana, were 3 separate causes, each acting independently of the other one. He adds that the Nigantha considered sins of the body more important than sins of the mind, and that this was a point of contention between Jaina and Buddhists. We have a direct confirmation of this fact in Jaina works, for the very question as to whether sin may be committed unconsciously is discussed there, and a bold affirmative is given. But lower down the Buddhists are even ridiculed for maintaining that the intention of a man decides whether a deed be sin or not be parsva and the doctrine of Kaitudmasam Barasamvyudo. This word, translated restraint in 4 directions *, is equivalent to the Prakrit Katagama, a well-known Jaina term which denotes the 4 vows of Parsva in contradistinction to the 5 vows of Mahavira. Here the Buddhists have probably made a mistake in ascribing to Mahavira a doctrine which properly belonged to his predecessor Parsva. Professor Jacobi, therefore, looks upon this as a proof that the Jaina tradition is correct, in asserting that followers of Parsva actually existed at the time of Mahavira. Drisva's followers are mentioned in the Jaina Sutra in quite a matter-of-fact way, especially Kesi, who seems to have been a leader of the sect in the time of Mahavira, so that there is no reason to doubt the authenticity of these records. There is an interesting legend of how the old and new body were united. And indications of some estrangement, even then, though not open hostility, may point to the cause of the division of the body into Svetambara Indian Antiquary, Vol. 9 p. 159. SBE, Vol. XLV, Satrakritang Got, 2. 4, p. 399. Ibid, 2. 6, pages 414 to 416. Cf. Indian Antiquary, 9. 158 ff, on Mahavira and his predecessors. Cf. Voars Dhyayana, Leo. XXIII, 62 The Jaina and Digambara. It was evidently a matter of time, and in the end developed into a great schism. Also the Mgantha are frequently mentioned in the Pitaka as opponents or converts of Buddha and his disciples. They must have been an important sect by the time Buddhism took its rise. Hence they must have existed before Nadaputa. There is yet another proof. Makhali G5 Sala divided mankind into 6 classes, and the third were the Nigantha. Hence, since he was a contemporary of Buddha and Mahavira, it is clear that the Nigantha had already attained to great importance. Early religious practices. Jacobi has deciphered some exhortations to a Savaka, or Nigantha layman, as follows: well, sir, you must desist from doing injury to beings in the east beyond a yogana from here, or to those in the west, north, south, always beyond a yogana from here. This is evidently a trace of the Digvirati vow of the Jaina, which lays down limits beyond which one shall not travel or do business in different directions. Again, later on it says, well, sir, take off all your clothes and declare, I belong to nobody, and nobody belongs to me. According to this statement, the duties of a Nigantha layman became during certain days equal to those of a monk. It was on common days only that the difference between a layman and monk was realized. Comparing this rule with that of present-day observances of the Jaina, throughout these specified days, we seem to see that Jaina have abetted somewhat in their rigidity with regard to the duties of a layman. Anglu Aranikaya, 3. 70, 3. Polytext Society, Sumangala Vilasanai, p. 119. Jaina vu. Tkijsks Today 63. Also Buddhaghosa says that the Nigantha hold the opinion that the soul has no color, in contradistinction to the Ajivika, who divide mankind into 6 classes according to the color of the soul, Atman. Both Nigantha and Ajivika, however, agree that the soul continues to exist after death and is free from ailments, ergo. Again, Buddhaghosa says that Nigantha Nadaputa considers cold water to be possessed of life, for which reason he does not use it. This is of course a well-known doctrine of the Jaina. Leading Jaina doctrines of today. We do not intend to discuss the present-day doctrines of the Jaina, which constitute the philosophy of their system, but only a few of the leading tenets. According to original authorities, all objects sensible or abstract are arranged under 9 categories, termed tattva, truths or existences. Ijiva, or life, is reducible to 2 classes. The first comprises animals, men, demons, and gods. The second, O combinations of the four elements earth, water, fire, air, and all the products of the vegetable kingdom. These are further arranged into 5 classes, according to the number of indriya they possess. It is a peculiarity of the Jaina notions of life, that it is always adapted to the body it animates, diminishing with the gnat and expanding with the elephant. Life is defined, generically, as having no beginning or ending, but endowed with its own attributes of agent and enjoyer, proportionate to the body it animates. Through sin it passes into animals, through virtue and vice combined it passes into men, through virtue alone it ascends to heaven, through the annihilation of both vice and virtue it obtains emancipation. 2. A jiva, or inertia, comprises objects or properties devoid of consciousness and life. These are 64 the Jaina vaguely classed, and generally incapable of interpretation. Their number is commonly set down as 14, the symbol of vitality. For a jiva, as well as jiva, can never be destroyed, though its form may change. 3. Punya, or good, is whatever causes happiness to living beings. There are as many as 42 kinds of goodness enumerated. 4. Papa, or ill, is the cause of man's unhappiness, 82 kinds are enumerated. Ashrava is the source from which the evil acts of living beings proceed. There are 5 specified sources: the indriya or organs of sense, the kashaya or passions, the avreda or non-observance of positive commands, and the yoga or attachment of the mind, speech, and body to any act, and last of all, the kriya or acts, which are prompted in 26 different ways. 6. Sanvara is the cause by which acts are stored up or impeded. The ingenious Jaina can think of 57 ways in which this can be done, e.g. by secrecy, endurance, gentleness. 7. Nirjara is the religious practice that destroys mortal impurities. It is a kind of penance, positive because repentant, and negative because of fasting and continence. 8. Bandha is the association of life with acts, as of milk with water, or fire with a red-hot iron. 9. Moksha is the last of the 9 principles, and consists in the liberation of the spirit from the bonds of action. It amounts to exemption from the incidents of life, and from the necessity of being born again. It implies profound calm, as of a fire gone out, or of the setting of a star, or of the dying of a saint. It is not annihilation but increasing apathy, which they, both Jaina and Buddhists, understand to be the extinction of their saints, and which they esteem to be supreme fixity. Jaina doctrines of today 65 the means by which moksha is to be attained are called, as in the case of Buddhism, the 3 jewels: right faith, right knowledge, and right conduct. Right faith is unswerving belief in the Jaina, who was originally a man bound, like others, but who has attained by his own exertions to emancipation and complete knowledge, and has preached the truth to suffering humanity. Right knowledge is the knowledge of the system promulgated by the Jaina. The world of Brahman cosmology is uncreated and eternal. Its component parts are 6 substances: souls, dharma, or moral merit, adharma, or sin, space, time, and atoms of matter. By the combination of these atoms are produced the 4 elements, and human bodies, as well as the phenomena of the world of sense, and the heavenly worlds. The Jaina are as extravagant with regard to time as with regard to space. They consider that human bodies and human lives increase during the Utsapinel, and diminish during the Avasarpini periods of incredible length. The doctrine of bondage of souls, as held by the Jaina, is practically identical with the views held by Indian thinkers generally. But they stand alone in maintaining that souls are to be found in apparently lifeless masses, in stone, in clods of earth, in drops of water, in fire, and in wind. Right conduct divides itself into 2 branches, according as it is incumbent upon the Jaina monk or layman. The Jaina monk, as we have seen above, on entering the order takes 5 vows. Not only is he to abstain from these sins himself in thought, word, and deed, but he is not to cause others to be guilty of them. These rules are carried out to the letter. The rules binding on laymen are less strict. They are expected to abstain from gross violation of the 5 precepts. They must be faithful to the marriage vow, and promise not to increase their wealth by unfair means. It is all the more remarkable, there 66 the Jaina for, that Jaina laymen are noted for their wealth. They are of course forbidden to indulge in flesh and spirituous drinks, and any other kinds of food, e.g. honey, which involve injury to animal life. Agriculture too is forbidden, as an injury to the earth body. Even the ordering another man to plow a field is stigmatized as a sin. The result of all this teaching has been to make Jaina laymen serious, well-conducted, and humane men, ready to endure great sacrifices for their religion, and especially for the welfare of animals. Advantage has been taken of this, under British rule, to enlist their sympathies with veterinary science. Jaina ritual and pantheon. Byler thinks that the original atheistic system of the Jaina was fitted out with an elaborate cult, as a concession to the lay mind. It is anyhow evident from the Kathakoe, or Jaina folklore, that the Jaina worship many gods. Their chief objects of worship are the Jaelna, or Tirthakara, whom they adore with flowers and incense and candles. Hymns of praise are sung in their honor, and pilgrimages are made to places hallowed by their memories. But, like the Buddhists, they allow the existence of the Hindu gods, and have admitted into their worship any of those that are connected with the tales of their saints, e.g. Indra, Sakra, Garuda, Sarasvati, Lakshmi. They have quite a pantheon, now, of Bhavanapati, Asura, Naga, Gandhana, and Sea, inhabiting the celestial and infernal regions, mountains, forests, and lower air. Each Tirthakara has a separate inha, or sign, which is usually placed below his image. An excellent list of the Jaina, from Eshava to Mahavira, appears in Bhajasa's cave temples of Jaintia / each Jaelna is one tani, Kotnkaga, pages 12-15. Oriental Translation Fund. New Series, 2. 1895, 2 Ferguson and Burgess, Ka Temples of India, p. 488. Jaina Temple 67 accompanied by his distinctive sign, e.g. Vrisha, bull, Sha, hooded snake, his color, and his place of nirvana. There are 5 favorites among the 24, especially the 1st, 23rd, and 24th. Jaina Temples. The Jaina possess some of the most remarkable places of pilgrimage in India, situated in the midst of most lovely mountain scenery, in the west, and south, and east. At Palitana, in Kathiawar, West India, is the temple-covered hill of Satrunjaya, the most sacred of the pilgrimage resorts of the Jaina, so that Jaina from all parts of India desire to erect temples upon it. There are temples of every size, from 3 feet square to large marble house, with columns and towers and plenty of openings. The latter are thus graphically described by Ferguson: they are situated in tucks, or separate enclosures, surrounded by high fortified walls. The smaller ones line the silent streets. Few yeti, or priests, sleep in the temples, and perform the daily services, and a few attendants are constantly there to keep the place clean, or to feed the sacred pigeons, who are the sole denizens of the spot, but there are no human habitations, properly so called, within the walls. The pilgrim or the stranger ascends in the morning, and returns when he has performed his devotions or satisfied his curiosity. He must not eat, or at least must not cook his food, on the sacred hill, and he must not sleep there. It is the city of the gods, and meant for them only, and not intended for the use of mortals. Some of these temples date from the 11th century, but the majority have been built in the present century. The other most important place of pilgrimage in the West was Mount Abu, on the borders of Eoypia. Ferguson, History of Architecture, Vol. 3 BK2. PAA 6. E2, 68. The Jainatana. 5 temples, wholly of white marble, are built there, which for minute delicacy of carving and beauty stand almost unrivaled. It is a beautiful spot, rising from the desert as abruptly as an island from the ocean, and presenting on almost every side inaccessible scarps 5,000 feet or 6,000 feet high. The summit can only be approached by ravines that cut into its sides. This makes it all the more remarkable that the white marble should have been conveyed there, for no quarries are to be found within 300 miles of the spot, and the carrying work must have involved immense expense. The highest point of the Bengal range of hills was also selected by the Jaina as a sacred spot. No less than 19 of their 24 Tirthakara are said to have died and been buried there, among others Parasnath, the last but one, and he consequently gave the hill the name it now bears. Before, however, Jainism became politically important, the center of power had gravitated toward the west. Were it not for this, there seems little doubt but that Parasnath would have been more important in their eyes than Palitana and Gimar I. Other temples in North Jaina style are found at Girnar, Gwalior, and Khajuraho, but in southern India they are divided into two classes, called Basti and Betu. The former are temples containing an image of one of the 24 Tirthakara, but the latter are not temples in the ordinary sense of the word, but courtyards open to the sky, containing images, not of a Tirthakara, but of one Gomati, who is unknown to the northern Jaina. These kinds of temples are found at Sravana Belgula, Mudbadri, and Guru Zakari. 1 Ferguson, History of Architecture, Ibid, p. 265 ff vol. 3 bk2. FPPFCO. Star. 241 Chapter 3 The 8 IKH The name of Jesus Christ. Neither is there any other name under heaven, that is given among men, wherein we must he saved. Acta 4. Lo, La, ev. I circumstantia under which Sikhism came into existence the era of modern Hinduism the Vaishnava Kabir. N. The history of the Sikh religious and political the 10 Guru Gobind Singh and the Khalsa Sikh Wars British occupation of the Punjab. The Granth or Sacred Book of the Sikh its two parts its language and authors cardinal doctrines the unity of the Supreme Being relation of man to the Supreme the origin of sin life after death the means of emancipation the authority of the Guru. 4. Other Sikh observances the Golden Temple at Amritar Sikh population and denominations Christian missions to the Punjab. The era of modern Hinduism. The period of the Reformation in Europe was also a time of religious movements in India. The final triumph of ancient Brahmanism over modern Buddhism in India had taken place, after a struggle in which the former was profoundly influenced by the latter. And modern Hinduism had arisen as the third and most complex phase of Hindu religious thought. The victory was gained at the cost of many changes, of an endless number of sects which arose, each exalting its own god to the place of supreme. The popular craving for personal objects of faith and devotion had to be satisfied by subordinating the purely spiritual Brahm, with its first manifestation Brahma, to the personal deities Shiva and Vishnu or to some form of these deities. Munier Williams, Religious Life and Thought in India, p. 54. 70 The Sikh This chapter is to be devoted to the consideration of one of the most interesting of these modem sects, interesting because it gave birth to a nation. Few words of introduction are felt to be necessary. There are three principal classes of the present-day Hindu, namely, I, Smarta, A, Saiva, 3, Vaishnava, and each has a distinctive school of thought attached to it. The erst class believes that man's spirit is identical with the one infinite spirit, Atma, Brahms, which is the substratum of the universe and only cognizable through internal meditation and self-communion. They are also believers i.e. the Trimurti, that is, in the three personal gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva with their train of subordinate deities but only as co-equal manifestations of the one eternal, impersonal spirit, and as destined ultimately to be reabsorbed into that spirit, and so disappear. These are the orthodox followers of Sankara. The second class of Hindu consists of the Saiva, who are believers in one god Shiva, the one supreme personal God, the one self-existent being, identified with the one spirit of the universe, and therefore not liable to lose his personality by reabsorption into that. The third class consists of the Vaishnava, who are believers in one personal God Vishnu, above every other god, including Shiva. This one God exists in an eternal body, which is antecedent to his earthly incarnations and survives all his incarnations. The Vaishnava. It is with one sect of the Vaishnava that we have to deal in this chapter. Let us first, however, glance at the character of Vaishnavism itself. At the outset we see that it is a form of monotheism, and presents the essential elements of a genuine religion, namely, 1 Munir Williams, Religious Life and Thought in India, p. 95 ff. Ukleiln of Sikhism 71 A personal devotion to a personal God, by trusting Him, loving Him, praying to Him, and obeying Him. Vishnu is represented as a god that evinced sympathy with mundane suffering, was interested in human affairs, and active for the welfare of all created things. This caused his frequent descents, avatara, on earth under various forms. Such a god was needed for India, and hence arose teachers, among whom was Sandilya, who insisted upon the doctrine of salvation by love and devotion, bhakti, a doctrine which was fully propounded in the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavata Purana. We cannot wonder that devotion to Vishnu in his 2 incarnations, Kama and Krishna, became the most popular religion of India. Nor is it difficult to understand that the condition of Vaishnavism depends largely upon personal leadership and influence, and is one of perpetual decay and revival, collapse and recovery. Kahir. Among the more important of the minor sects of Vaishnavism was that founded by Emananda early in the 14th century. The sect of Kabir, Kabir Panthai, is always included among the Vaishnava sects, because the founder was reputed to have been a disciple of Ramananda. Kabir's teaching undoubtedly had much influence throughout Upper India in the 15th and 16th centuries. And his sayings are constantly quoted by Guru Nanak and his successors, who were the authors of the sacred writings of the Granth. It is clear that his teaching exerted considerable influence over the Sikh religion. In these teachings of his, Kabir sets himself against the whole body or Hindu superstitions, ridiculing the Shastra and Purana, rejecting every distinction of caste, religion, and sect, and condemning idolatry and everything approaching to it. 1 Munir Williams, Religious Life and Thought in India, pages 158 to 160. 72 The Sikh's positive doctrines and precepts are embodied in numerous collections in Hindi, as well as in the Sikh Granth. From these we gather that the keynote of his teaching was submission, in matters of faith and morals, to the authority of the Guru. Not that he ever claimed infallibility for his own utterances, for he constantly warned his disciples to investigate for themselves the truth of every word he uttered. If this man was the most perfect representative of a reforming movement, it is unfortunate that so little is known of his antecedents. The Mohammedans claim him as one of themselves, and among the Hindu there is a widespread tradition which represents him as having been converted from Mohammedanism. And there is no doubt that the teaching of the Vedanta, as expounded by him, found its way into the Granth through the respect paid by the Guru to his faith. The history of the 8% LCH. With the above introduction, it is time to turn to the history of the Sikh religion itself. It will be well to divide the history into 2 parts, a. The religious history. 6. The political history. a. The religious history begins with Guru Baba Nanak Bedi, who is known to have been born in 1469, not far from Lahore in the Punjab. His biographies in Punjabi are filled with myths and stories of miraculous events connected with him, invented soon after his death. But there is no reason to doubt that at an early age he associated himself with religious leaders of all kinds, and wandered to various shrines in search of some clue to the labyrinth of Hinduism. It is even affirmed that he went to Mecca. He laid no claim, however, to be the originator of a new religion, but mainly founded his teaching on Bharth, the Telugims of India, pages 339, 240. Religious history of Sikhism 73 That of his predecessors, especially that of Kabir, whom he constantly quoted. It does not appear that Nanak directly attacked or denounced caste, as Kabir did, but rather tolerated it as a civil institution, and aimed at delivering Hinduism, and especially the Vaishnavism of northern India, from superstition and idolatry. Thus he rejected the Veda, the Shastra, and the Purana, as well as the Quran, and yet the Brahman was to be treated with respect. There are neither Hindu nor Muslims was the subject, we are told, of one of his first sermons. Nanak's death, we know, occurred on October 10, 1538. One of his sons was expected to succeed him, but to the surprise of those present at his deathbed he nominated, as second guru, his devoted disciple Lahana, of Trehan clan. His devotion to his master seems to have been his chief merit, for he was quite illiterate. He appointed Baba Amar Das Bala to succeed him. For nearly a century the Sikh appear to have remained a purely religious community of inoffensive Puritans. As far as the fifth guru, the supreme authority was transmitted by means of consecration, at the hands of the dying teacher, to the worthiest of his disciples. The name Sikh means disciple, and the strength of the movement lay in the relation of the disciple to the guru or spiritual guide. All this time the Mughal dynasty had been rising under Babar and his successor Humayun, till under the long reign of Akbar, 1556 to 1605, the Sikh increased greatly in number and power. This more than tolerant Mohammedan emperor sought diligently for a knowledge of other faiths, and Amar Das, the third guru, was one of those who had conference with him. His successor and son-in-law, Guru Baba Ram Das Barth, TLW Religions of India, p. 245. By the term guru, the Sikhs mean a person who stands between them and their ud, and who has full control over their spiritual welfare. Sadler. 74 IHE Sikh Sadi, received from Akbar a gift of a piece of land, on which he dug the large square tank afterwards called Amritsar, the pool of immortality. It was in the last year of this guru's life that several Jesuit fathers from Goa were invited by Akbar to visit the Punjab. It is important to notice that, from the time of Im Das Sadi, the fourth guru, the succession became hereditary, 1581. An authentic story tells us that this was granted by the third guru to his daughter on account of her devotion to her father. She asked for and was granted by him the three following requests: I. That her husband should succeed her father, a. That the succession should become hereditary, 3. That the Sadi should be respected 16 times more than the descendants of any former guru. The remaining 5 guru were regarded as rulers, rather than as teachers. Arjan's works are manifold. He compiled the sacred book called the Adi Granth, the materials for which he had received unarranged from his father. Thus he provided the Sikh with a written standard of authority. He built the golden temple in the middle of his father's tank, and thus formed the nucleus of the sacred town Amritsar, which is still the metropolis and holy place of the Sikh religion. He established a regular system of tax collecting from all adherents to the sect in different places. It is not surprising then to learn that his power and prosperity only lasted during Akbar's lifetime, or that he incurred the displeasure of Jahangir, Akbar's successor, and was imprisoned, 1606, and died soon after, for the Mohammedan government could scarcely permit of the growth of an imperium in imperio. From this moment the community of the Sikh rapidly changes into a military theocracy, to which the fierce population of the Jats supplied a fanatical soldiery. The promulgation of the Granth for the instruction of the people had made a way for the Sir William Hunter, Indian Empire, p. 808. Their political history 75 change in the character of the leadership. The work of the teacher was now in great measure transferred to the guardians of the sacred volume, who read it in the ears of the people. The lives of Guru Har Govind, Guru Har Rai and Guru Har Kisho are comparatively unimportant. But the ninth Guru, Tegh Bahadur, attracted the attention of the fanatical Emperor Aurangzeb. Whether it was the emperor's fanaticism, or the fault of this contemplative guru, he was put to death, without cause, at Delhi 1675. This roused the Sikh to greater zeal, and henceforward they became a nation of fighting men. B. Political history. Guru Govind Rai Sadi, son of Tegh Bahadur, after passing some years in retirement and study, came forth a vigorous and enthusiastic leader with high aims. If Guru Nanak was the founder of the Sikh religion, Guru Govind would be the founder of the Sikh nationality. He therefore set himself the task of organizing the Sikh of the Punjab, who were now becoming formidable for their number, their physique, and their warlike propensities. The first adherents of Nanak had been mostly Jats or Khatris. Many of them were men of great stature and powerful frame. As Sikh they acquired a distinctive appearance, by giving up the Hindu practice of shaving the head and face. They were forbidden the use of tobacco. All Govind's plans were directed towards increasing the distinction between his followers and Hindu and Mohammedans in general. First he called the sect by the name of Khalsa, borrowed from the Arabic khalas, meaning pure. Then he surrounded it with a number of regulations, under the influence of which it became a people by itself, devoted to triumph or extermination. All social inequality was abolished in the heart of the Khalsa body, every member of which received the aristocratic surname of Singh, in Sanskrit Singha, lion, and this at the risk of offending the most inveterate Hindu prejudices. 76 The Sikh costume was regulated in a uniform fashion, and every disciple was bound to have with him 5 marks of his discipleship, each beginning with the letter Kaka, K, viz. Long hair, a comb, a 2-edged cane, a bangle, and breeches reaching to the knee. With the exception of the religious respect paid to cows, all usages, practices, and ceremonies of Hinduism were rigorously prescribed, although Baba Govind Singh Sati himself personally took a part in one of the worst Hindu superstitions, to the extent of sacrificing one of his followers to propitiate the goddess Durga. There was henceforth to be a distinct rite of initiation, known as the Paghal and consisting of a kind of sherbet. Sugar is mixed with water by means of a 2-edged knife, while the Guru reads the first part of the Jaspji. This mixture is then dashed on the head, face, and eyes, and sprinkled over other parts of the body of each new disciple, and the rest is given him to drink. From the moment of initiation the Sikh became a soldier, and the holy war his permanent occupation. He was not even to return a salute from a Hindu. Besides these rites, iron came henceforth to be respected, and thereby certain superstitious practices crept into this iconoclastic religion. The Sikh soldier prays before handling his sword, and the book of the Granth has become an object of adoration. Lastly, Govind tried to procure the original book of the Adi Granth, as drawn up by Guru Arjan, in order to introduce into it a more martial spirit. He was, however, foiled in this by the other Sati, to whom the volume had been entrusted, as they did not acknowledge Govind as Guru. The cumbersome supplement that he composed was then called the Granth of the 10th reign. The object of his life Govind could not indeed carry out, for it was an unequal struggle against the formidable empire of Aurangzeb. After 30 years of fighting, what remained of his faithful ones were their political history 77 dispersed among the mountains while he accepted a post of command in the imperial armies, and fell at last by the hand of an Afghan assassin near Nandar in the territories of the Nizam. The Sikh had not adopted all his reforms, and he appears to have clearly foreseen that at the stage which the sect had reached, the personal influence of the hour would henceforth be a source of schism, rather than of union. Therefore when pressed on his deathbed to appoint his successor, he declared that the dignity was abolished, and that the Granth would for the future be the Guru of the Sikhs. After his decease the direction of the Khalsa body is said by some to have passed into the hands of an ascetic named Banda, who introduced further novelties of usage, such as the prohibition of spirituous liquors, in addition to that of tobacco. This only caused divisions, and infuriated resistance. Besides all this, the forces of the Khalsa were again and again massacred and nearly annihilated by the generals of the Emperor Farrukh Sir. Therefore after Banda's death by torture, 1716, the direction of the sect fell into the hands of a meadery corporation of zealots, the Akali, the faithful of the Eternal, instituted, they say, by Guru Govind himself. When the dissolution of the Mughal Empire permitted the Sikh to regain a footing on the plain, the Akali set themselves up as the guardians of the sanctuary of Amritsar, where the original copy of the Granth of Guru Arjan was preserved. On great occasions they summoned together here the Gurmat, or the Council of the Guru, the General Assembly of the Sikh chiefs, in which the supreme, temporal, and spiritual authority of the nation was vested, and which kept up in the sect a sufficient coherence and prevented the occurrence of new divisions in the bosom of the Khalsa. Elphinstone, History of India, Book 12. p. 679, 1866 edition. Barth, The Bellygums of India, p. 248. 78. The Sikh. The rest of the history is entirely political, and can be soon told. First, the Sikh recovered to their federation, the greater part of the Jat Sardars, who had carved out for themselves small feudal states on either side of the Sutlej. In 1764, after the final retreat of the Afghans, they took possession of Lahore, and became undisputed masters of the Punjab. They could at that time muster 70,000 cavalry. Then arose Ranjit Singh, the Lion of the Punjab, 1797-1839, who, having obtained the appointment of governor of Lahore from the Afghan emir, proved to be the consolidator of the power of the Sikh, and soon made himself master of the whole Punjab. He set himself the task of basing a personal despotism upon the religious fanaticism of the Sikh. The British, whose power in India was rapidly extending, were at this time desirous of an alliance with Lahore. A British envoy, Mr. Charles Metcalfe, was received by Ranjit at Kashmir in 1809, and an alliance was formed. The Khalsa were organized into an army, under European officers, which for steadiness and religious fervor has had no parallel since the Ironsides of Cromwell. Till his death in 1839, Ranjit Singh was ever loyal to the engagements he had entered into with Metcalfe in 1809. But he left no son capable of wielding his scepter, and Lahore was torn by dissensions. The only strong power was the army of the Khalsa, which, after the disastrous defeat of the British arms in Afghanistan in 1842, burned to measure its strength with the British sepoys. The French generals, Avidable and Court, were foolishly ousted, and the supreme military command was vested in a series of panchayats, or elective committees of 5. In 1845, then, the Sikh army, numbering 60,000 men with 150 guns, crossed the Sutlej and invaded British territory. Sir Hugh Gough, the British commander-in-chief, together with the Governor-General, hurried up to the frontier. Within 3 weeks their political history 79 pitched battles were fought, at Mutki, Firozshahar, Aliwal, and Sobran. The British loss on each occasion was heavy, but by the last victory the Sikh were fairly driven into and across the Sutlej, and Lahore surrendered to the British. By the terms of peace then dictated, the infant son of Kanjit, Dulip Singh, was recognized as Raja. The Jalandhar Dug or tract between the Sutlej and the Bias was annexed, the Sikh army was limited to a specified number. Major Henry Lawrence was appointed to be resident at Lahore, and a British force was detailed to garrison the Punjab for a period of 8 years. Sir H. Hardinge returned to England in 1848, and was succeeded by Lord Dalhousie. He had not been 6 months in India before the Second Sikh War broke out. 2 British officers were treacherously assassinated at Multan. Unfortunately, Henry Lawrence was at home on sick leave. The British army was not ready to act in the hot weather, and despite the single-handed exertions of Lieutenant, afterwards Sir Herbert, Edwards, the outbreak of fanaticism led to a general rising. The Khalsa army again came together, and once more fought on even terms with the British. On the fatal field of Kiliariwala, which patriotism prefers to call a drawn battle, the British lost 3,400 officers and men, besides 4 guns and the colours of 3 regiments. Before reinforcements could come out from England, with Sir Charles Napier as Commander-in-Chief, Lord Gough had restored his own reputation by the crowning victory of Gujarat, which absolutely destroyed the Sikh army. Multan had previously fallen, and the Afghan horse, Imdar Dust Muhammad, were chased back with ignominy to their native hills. The Punjab henceforth became a British province, supplying a virgin field for the administrative talents of Dalhousie and the 2 Lawrences. Ejadulip Imperial Gazetteer of India, Vol. 6 p. 411 ff, or Encyclopaedia Britannica, 9th edition, Vol. 20, pages 3, 112. 80. The Sikh Singh received an allowance of 58,000 a year, on which he retired as a country gentleman to Suffolk. The first step in the pacification of the Punjab was a general disarmament, which resulted in the delivery of no less than Lau.000 weapons of various kinds. Then followed a settlement of the land tax, village by village, at an assessment below that to which it had been raised by the Sikh exactions, and an introduction of a loose but equitable code of civil and criminal procedure. The system of roads and canals was greatly improved and extended by Colonel Robert Napier, afterwards Lord Napier of Magdala, and the security of British peace and the personal influence of British officers were felt to the furthest comers of the province. Thus it happened that, when the mutiny broke out in 1857, the Punjab remained not only quiet, but loyal, after only 8 years' experience of British rule, while the northwest provinces, which had been British territory for more than 50 years, rose in rebellion. The Sikh population never wavered. Crowds of willing recruits came down from the Afghan hills. And thus the Punjab, instead of being itself a source of danger, was able to furnish a portion of its own garrison for the siege of Delhi. The sacred books of the Sikh. The Adi Granth or first Iduk forms that part which is most generally revered. The Granth of the 10th reign finds favor with the more fanatical section of the community. At present we have only an English translation of some part of the Adi Granth, as translated by Professor Trump, 1877. The Adi Granth is further subdivided as follows: I the Jap JL, which consists of introductory verses by Nanak, used after early bathing. _2. The So Daru, consisting of extracts from Rag Asa and Rag Gujari, which is used by the Sikh at evening prayer. Their sacred books 8I3. The So Purku, or other extracts from Rag Asa. 4. The Sohila, or 3 short sections, extracted from the Rags Gauri, Asa, and Dhanasari, used as a prayer before retiring to rest. The above pieces, being intended for devotional purposes, were therefore put at the beginning of the Granth. 5. The Rags, which form the body of the Granth, 31 in number, the first 4 being the most important. 6. The Bhag, or conclusion of the Granth, containing 13 portions, the last portion of which is always read in various ceremonies of the Sikh. In the above rags the verses of different guru have been distributed, apparently without any leading principle, as hardly any verse is connected internally with another. It is to be noticed too that the name given to these portions implies the tune, rag, to which they are sung. Turning next to the language of the Adi Granth, it is easily inferred that the idiom is not the same throughout. From a linguistic point of view the Granth is of great interest, because it forms a treasury of old dialects called Guttiaj, specimens of which, in some cases, are nowhere else to be found. Gurmukhi, that which comes from the mouth of the Guru, is an antiquated form of Punjabi, which should be clearly distinguished from the modern Hindi of the northwest provinces. The Granth contains sufficient materials to enable us to bridge the gap between the older Prakrit dialects and the modem languages of the Aryan stock in India. The sacred book is supposed to have been composed by at least 35 different authors, 6 of whom were Guru, 14 were Bhagat or saints, and 15 were Bhatti or professional panegyrists. The dates of these authors must therefore be examined. Firstly, the Bhatti may be dismissed as probably *e.g. Trump, Adi Granth, pages CXX, c. 83. The Sikh personal flatterers of Guru Arjan, whose writings are quite valueless. Secondly, if Professor Trump is to be relied on, the oldest writer in the collection was Namdev, who lived about the 14th century. He is also considered the oldest Marathi poet, and represents in his verses in the Granth some peculiarities of modem Marathi. About the same time lived Trilokan, the Brahmin, who with Namdev was an inhabitant of the Deccan. Jadhav is also best placed as writing his Prakrit verses during the 14th century, and not earlier, according to Lasson, or later, according to Wilson. Thirdly, the writings of Ramananda, Kabir, and his disciples date back to the end of the 14th and the beginning of the 15th centuries, for they all write Old Hindi. The only other writer in pure Hindi was Guru Gobind Singh, who lived 2 centuries later. For Nanak and his followers seem to have employed a mixture of 2 dialects, Punjabi and Hindi. There was a special reason for endeavoring to write in Hindi, for Hindi was the sacred language of all Indian devotees, and had been raised therefore to a kind of standard for religious compositions. It rapidly became unintelligible, however, to the people of the Punjab. It would be beyond our object to enter fully into the peculiarities of the idiom of the Granth. It is only necessary, therefore, to say here that the whole book is written in verse according to Hindi taste. It is noticeable that the measures of Sanskrit poetry have been discarded, and the meters are either Prakrit meters or later inventions. The verses must rhyme together, but are only measured by quantity of space or pauses. Cardinal Dr. Riddies. From what has been said above we shall expect to find in the religion of the Sikh, not so much anything new, as an emphasis laid upon several ideas, sacred books 83 already familiar to the Hindu mind. The reforming element consisted just in this very reassertion of truth that had become hidden, and overgrown by superstition and religious observance. At the same time, in the study of the sacred Granth it is important to distinguish between the teachings of Kabir and Nanak. Kabir was not a Sikh guru, but only a religious teacher who exercised profound influence over them. His teaching is essentially pantheistic, whereas theirs is a bold attempt at monotheism. Hence it comes that there are apparent contradictions in the sacred book, for many of his pantheistic utterances are incorporated in the Granth, and not only so, but they exercised influence over the phraseology of several succeeding Auru, especially that of Arjan. The unity of the Supreme Being is plainly asserted. The very first line of the Adi Granth opens with the following attributes of the deity: 1 God, Ek Ankar, the true name, Sat Janam, the doer person, Kardapurk, without fear, Nirban, without enmity, Nirvar, endless being, Akal Murat, uncreated, Ajuni Senbin. Compare also Uliam shall I call the second? There is none. In all is that one spotless one. Know that there are 2 ways, but only one Lord. There are 6 houses, 6 Gurui, 6 methods of instruction. The Guru of the Guru is one, the Garbs many. The above 3 quotations come from Kags Kaurl and Asa, and are attributed to Nanak. They have evident reference to Brahms, the Supreme Being, while the 2 ways and the 6 Guru refer, on the one hand to Hindu and Mohammedan, on the other to various Hindu sects. But we must go deeper to find what relation the Supreme Being has to creation. Brahms is only creator in the sense of being able to expand into plurality of forms. For Arjan says, he himself is one and he himself is many. Kriya Gaurl, Mah. V. Sukhmani 12. 6 Fa. 84 The Sikh tours are led to consider themselves as individual beings, only because of Maya, illusion, which the Absolute has spread out over the whole universe. All thereby fall into the errors of egotism and duality. The world is mere play and sport of the Absolute Being, which goes on expanding and contracting itself as it pleases. Brahms, generally known as Hari, gives life and destroys ad libitum, e.g. between thee and me and thee. What is the difference? Like gold and the bracelet, made of it, like water and a wave. These words of Arjan are sheer pantheism. A grosser and a finer kind of pantheism does, however, exist in the Granth. The grosser identifies things with the Absolute, the finer distinguishes between the Absolute and the finite being. The latter, as we have seen above, frequently rises to theism, and represents God as not only uncontaminated by Maya, but even distinct from his creation, e.g. whose body the universe is, he is not in it, the creator is not in it. In this finer shade of pantheism creation assumes the form of emanation from the Supreme, as with the Sufi. For either atomic matter is considered as co-eternal with the Absolute and immanent in it, or the reality of matter is more or less denied, and called RD/NRJOV, so that the divine is the only real essence in all. This last view borders on idealism. There are some differences in the teaching of Kabir and Nanak with respect to idolatry. Kabir ridicules it altogether as follows: a stone is made the Lord, the whole world worships it. Who remains in alliance to this, is drowned in the black stream. But Nanak does not seem really to have forbidden the worship of other gods on the ground of the unity of the Supreme. Like many other Hindu teachers, he was contented with contending for the supremacy of Brahm. See 8th Bag, Evidas I Bag Gauri Purbai. Of Kabir, Lile. Sikh Doctrines 85b. The Rdatikm of man to the Supreme. The human soul is, as it were, scintilla animi divini, and so by itself immortal. It is the aim and object of the individual soul to be reunited with the fountain of Ughite, from which it has emanated. No reason is given in the Granth for this emanation, but the return is cut off by works done in the body and by its impurity, of which second love or duality is the cause. These evils subject the soul to metempsychosis. See the origin of sin. Nanak did not deny that the world was under the dominion of sin. The object of his mission was to show mankind the way of escape from misery, and his means of escape will be considered later on. He fell into the common pantheistic conception of the absolute being responsible for sin. The Granth plainly teaches that all creatures are subject to an absolute destiny. There are also passages which pointedly deny the liberum arbitrium in man. Even the gods are not accepted from Maya. This is now and then keenly felt and acknowledged. Ravidas boldly asks, if I would not commit sins, O endless one, how would thy name be purifier of sinners? Man then is impelled by three qualities: goodness, passion, and darkness. Under these influences and that of Maya, he commits acts which subject the soul to transmigration. D. The means of obtaining emancipation. The repetition of the name of Hari is the means whereby to drive away all the filth of sins, to liberate from all further transmigrations, and to unite with Hari. Whosoever mutters the name Hari is saved in a moment. This would indeed have been too easy a way of salvation, had not the Sikh Guru Saif, 86 the Sikh guarded it. The name of Hari can therefore only be obtained from the true Auru, who alone can bestow the rite of initiation and communicate the mantra of the name of Hari, e.g. by the true instruction of the Guru he easily utters Hari. In connection with this initiation the doctrine of election is taught, e.g. whose destiny it is, him the true OV/RU unites, with Hari. But in order to prevent people from fatalism, inquirers are encouraged to seek the Lord, as follows: many are seeking the Lord. They obtain in their own heart the supreme Brahm. Life after death. In no doctrine is the influence of Kabir more widely felt than in the teaching of the Granth upon Nirvana, Punjabi, Nirbat. The immortality of the soul is asserted only so far as the idea of transmigration requires it. But when the soul has reached its highest object, it is no more mentioned. Kabir thus describes the process of reabsorption of the soul in the fountain of light: a drop is mixed with a drop. A drop cannot be separated from a drop. And again asterisk, when I was, thou, wast, not. Now art thou, and I am not. Now I and thou have become one, my mind is assured seeing one. This is exactly the pessimistic hope of the Buddha emerging again in the popular teachings of Indian medieval reformers, after having been expelled from India with Buddhism long before. The only difference consists in the means to obtain the desired end. Bagdarl, Mag. V. Sukhmani v5. Exhibit, Sukhmani 6. Ibid, Kabir, 29. Idid, Kabir, XXI. I seek doctrines 87. The authority of the Guru. From the above standards of doctrine, we see that the Auru is set up as the only infallible guide to complete emancipation. He is the mediator between Hari and mankind, he is the boat that carries men over the water of existence, he is the very fullness of Hari himself. The disciple has therefore to submit to the direction of the Auru unconditionally, mind and body, while the Guru freely disposes of the treasures of Hari. It is fortunate that, according to the Granth, the Guru need not exact much from his disciples to effect their emancipation. He gives him the name of Hari, enjoining him to mutter it continually. He requires him to repeat and sing the qualities of Hari, meditating upon them continually. He teaches him how to clear away his own ego, and to consider himself as identical with the Brahm, pointing to this as the highest knowledge attainable. But in point of fact the Guru has only one pantheistic sentence to teach, Soham, i.e. that, I am identical with the Supreme. And the three steps towards the attainment of this end are thus described: first, by the one his own self was produced. Second, duality, and third, the threefold Maya. The fourth step is the high step of the disciple, in which he is acquiring the perfectly true one. When this fourth step is obtained, emancipation becomes complete. The soul need perform no religious works. Man has become totally hopeless in the world, and if he dies thus merged in meditation upon Hari, he becomes emancipated while in the body, and at death does not come again. Nanak says, the disciple remains absorbed in the Supreme, i.e. in communion and fellowship. By duality is meant God, the subject, by creation becoming object. Igmak, Maiha. Il, Estpad 6. 4 Kag Gauri, Maiha. Il, Estpad I8. 88 The Sikh other Sikh observances. Besides blind obedience to the Guru, there are a few other duties which each disciple must observe. The first consists of service to the saints which is considered as quite essential to salvation. Hence disciples are enjoined to wash the feet of the pious and to drink the water used in Sodoyag. They should become a life sacrifice to the holy men, Sadsangat, and should seek their society as the greatest blessing. Then come the triad of duties, namely, remembering the name, giving alms, and parasictizing ablutions. The two latter are no longer duties, however, when the knowledge of Brahm has been obtained. Occasional exhortations are given to abstain from falsehood, slander, and looking upon another's wife, besides purifying the heart from the 5 vices of lust, wrath, greediness, infatuation, and egotism. Charity to animal life, and therefore abstinence from animal food, was enjoined in early times. But the latter became a dead letter when the Sikh became a military nation in the days of the 10th Guru. Prayer to He Supreme is only recommended through TTHE medium 905 registered trademark : on TTHE other hand, NK is to be common-ended for recognizing, in advance of many teachers of his day, that secular business need form no obstacle to a religious life. He advised his followers to keep to their own occupations and not to leave the world. To sum up the teaching of the sacred Granth of the Sikh in a few words, we find salvation is said to depend upon the inward state of the mind, and not on outward things, and the social system of caste is not directly assailed by Nanak or his followers, until legally abolished by Guru Gobind Singh among the Khalsa body. So that though the teaching of the Veda and Purana is reproved, the Brahmin is allowed to remain the family priest. Temple at Amritsar 89. The Golden Temple at Amritsar. In the present day much of the religious devotion of the Sikh centers round the sacred Granth itself, and the shrine in which it rests, the Golden Temple of Amritsar. This temple, called Harmandar, the Temple of Hari, or sometimes Darbar Sahib, is one of the most striking sights in India. One must picture to oneself a large square sheet of water, bordered by a marble pavement. In the center of the water rises the beautiful temple with its gilded dome and cupolas, approached by a marble causeway. In structure and appearance it may be regarded as a kind of compromise between a Hindu temple and a Mohammedan mosque, reminding one of the attempted compromise between Hinduism and Islam, which was once a favorite idea both with Kabir and Nanak. In point of mere size the shrine is not imposing, but the proportions seem nearly perfect. All the lower part is of marble inlaid with precious stones, and here and there overlaid with gold and silver. The principal entrance looks towards the north. The interior is even more gorgeous than the exterior. On the ground floor is a well-proportioned vaulted hall. 4 short passages lead to this vaulted chamber. All around on the outside is a narrow corridor. In the interior, opposite the principal entrance, sits the Granthi scribe with the open Granth before him. He is attended by other officials of the temple, who assist him in chanting the sacred text. The Granth is indeed the real divinity of the shrine, and is treated as if it had a veritable personal existence. Every morning it is dressed out in costly brocade and reverently placed on a low throne under a jeweled canopy. All day long chowries are waved over the sacred volume, and every evening it is transported to the second temple, Akalbunga, on the edge of the lake opposite the causeway, where it is Munir Williams, Rajimi's life, and THMGHT in India, P175 FF, go the Sikh made to repose for the night in a golden bed within a consecrated chamber, railed off and protected from all profane intrusion by bolts and bars. Population. Denominations. The total population of Sikh, that bear the name of Singh, in India, according to the Elijah census of 1891, numbers 1,907,833. Of these all but 37,000 live in the Punjab, where they now form 70% of the population. Their stronghold is the country between the rivers Ravi and Sutlej, including the historical cities of Lahore, Amritsar, Ambala, and Jalandhar. In no district, however, do they form as much as 80% of the population. From a religious point of view, the followers of Nanak, exclusive of those who are the real Sikh, form four leading denominations. The Udasi are a society of monks that reject the Granth of Govind Singh, and accept only the Adi Granth. They have their own guru, who assumes spiritual authority. Their devotional service is simple, consisting of morning and evening song of praise, and playing upon the rebeck or violin. They have deviated from asceticism and taken up secular occupations. These Udasi were founded by Sri Gand, the eldest son of Nanak, but are not recognized by the Sikh. 2. The Suthra, meaning pure, took their origin from Guru Hari Ai. They are, however, renowned for their debauchery and drunkenness, and are to be found in every town in the Punjab. They are a public nuisance, and are disavowed by the Sikh, being mostly joined by profligates and vagabonds. 3. The Nirmate Sati, pure saints, were originally strict Sikh, and followed exclusively the Granth and Govind Singh. But then they became tinged with the Hinduism of the Shastra and the Vedanta, and so adopted the reddish yo instead of white robes. Now they mostly live in separate societies under missions to the Punjab 91 a guru, and live a celibate life. Their brotherhood owns no caste, and they are largely established at Amritsar, being noted for their purity of morals. RV. The Divane Sad, mad saints, keep their hair uncut like the Sikh, and wear a necklace of shells, and a very large feather in their turban. They mostly consist of Jats and Tanners, and their devotional service consists only of muttering the true name, of Hari. But the most interesting body, from whom alone the real Sikh of the present day come, are the Akali, worshippers of the timeless being, who are said to have been instituted by Govind Singh. They were the zealots who firmly withstood innovations, and formed a powerful and dangerous body at the time of Sikh independence, but are now dwindling away. They could be distinguished by their blue clothes. In those days also they directed the councils of the Gurmata, or National Council, in its deliberations, besides acting as defenders of the faith and presiders at religious ceremonies. Christian missions to the Punjab. For many years after the Indian Mutiny little fruit was seen among the Sikh from the labors of Christian missionaries, though greater success was gained among Mohammedans. But the influence of missionary education has begun to tell, and recently a movement has been set on foot by several friends of the Sikh, called the KG Also Prayer Union. It has taken for its motto, the evangelization of the Sikh in this generation, and is rapidly interesting English Christians in the spiritual welfare of the Sikh. The originator of the scheme, himself a Sikh convert to Christianity, now studying medicine in England, belongs to the family of the Sikh guru, and will give further information about the people that lie so near to his heart to any who care to make inquiries. Khalsa Prayer Union, in his name, 1897, 3rd edition. Address, Baba Makan Singh Sodal, London Hospital, Authorities Barra, the Elijam of India, 40, 49, 72, 73, 77. B. Tilaler, Sacred Lambs of Bai Areas, 47. Darmstedter, Essay on the Mythology of the Avesta, 14, De Harles, Avesta, 25. Dosabai Sarabji Karika, History of the Parsis, 33, 36. Elphinstone, History of India, 77. Encyclopaedia Britannica, 79. Fernson and Nrgis, Omi Temples of India, Apragupsun, History of Architecture, 67, 68. Hang, The Five Gathas, 13. Hang, Tly Book of Ardavarv, 13. Hang, Essays on the Sacred Language, Writings, and Belijun of Parsis, is, 16, 18, 22. Hunter, Indian Empire, 74, Imperial Oaset and R of India, 79. Indian Antiquary, 61. In his Najan, 91. Lafizan, Indisk Alter Thutunslo Kunda, 40, 45. Munier Williams, Religious Life AMD Thought in India, 69, 70, 71, 89. Oldenburg, Buddha, His Life, His Doctrine, His Order, 40. Polytext Society, Sumagala Vilasanai, 62. East Davids, Buddhism, Its History Ami Literature, 48. Sacred Books of the East, 4, 21, 22, 23, 24, 26, 32 JV, 18, XXIV, XXXVII, J3, Tsu, 42, 43, 44, 48, 50, XXSD, 14, XLV, 44, $7, S8, 59, 60, 61. Spiegel, Age of the Avesta and Zoroaster, 16. Tawny, Kothkofa, 66. Trump, Adi Orumth, 81. Vienna Oriental Journal, 51, Weber, Indisk Study N, 40, 56. Weber, Sacred Literature of the Jains, 49, 53, West, The Book of the Mainagai Card, 13. West, Pala/EI Texts, 13, 14, 15, 16. Wilson, Parsi Biajan, 21. Wilson, Essays and Lectures on the Belijun of the Hindus, 40. Index Abu Jafar Adavari, 20. Achaemenian Religion, the 28, Adarbad Maliraspand, 32. Adhamia, 65. Adi Kranth, the 74, 80, Language of 81, Authors of 81. Agama, 6. Agazatru, 43. Abstix, Jaina, 59, Ahura Mazda, 26. Ajiba, 63. Akali, 77. Akbar, 73. Amar Das Bala Baba, 73. Ayaga, the SS Animism, Jaina, 57. Ardashir Ba Bagan, King, 21, Ardaviraf Nama, 37. Aristotle, on Magi, 11. Arjun, Works of, 74. Ashrama, the 4th, 48. Esraya, 64. Adishadharans, 29. Adishbaiams, 29. Atman, the 48, 58. Arangslobe, 75. Avasarpanai, 65. Avesta language, is. Ista proper, the 22. Avidable, Generaj, 78. Bactrian languages, 18, Bands, 77. Bandha, 64. Barashanfim, the 30. Barsam, the 30. Barthanjina, 40, 49. Basti, 68. Battles in the Punjab, 78. Bodhayana, 47. Barasis on Maki, 11. Betang, 68. Badraboy Workov, 55. Bhagat, 81. Bhati, 81. Bhagavata, 81. Bible Witness to Magi, 10. Birth Ceremonies, Farsi, 31. Brahms, 83. Brahman Ascetics, Rules of, 47. Brahman Cosmology, 65. Brahmanishu, Buddhism and Jainism, 44, 5 Vows of, 46. Brookhouse, H., on Farsi, 12. Buddha and Mahavira, 42. Buddhaghosa, 63. Buddhism, 44, 5 Vows of, 46. Bueller on Gautama, 47, 50. Burial Ceremonies, Farsi, 31. Bumouth, E., on Farsi, 12. Calendar, Farsi, 35. Canon, Farsi, 21, Jaina, 52. Caste, Abolition of, 88. Kilianwala, 79. Christian Missions to the Punjab, 91. Costumes, Farsi, 34. Court, General, 78. Cunningham, Sir A., on Mutra inscriptions, 50. Cyrus, belief of, 10. Dalhousie, Lord, 79. Damascus on Magi, 11. Danda, the 3, 60. Darmstetter on Farsi, 14, 24. Daharles on Farsi, 14, on Zoroaster, 25. Death rate, Farsi, 34. Devardhai, 50, and Jaina Canon, Dharma, 65. Digambara, the, 56. Digvirati the, 62. Dinkard, the, 21. Dio Chrysostomus, 11. Diogenes of Laird on Magi, 11. 94 Index T Idiln Sod, the, 91. Doctrines, Sikh, 83. Dogmas, Zoroastrian, 28. Dust Muhammad, 79. Dress, Parsi, 34. Dualism, Zoroastrian, 27. Dulp Singh, 79. Duparan, A., on Farsi, 12. Edwards, Sir H., 79. Elements, Worship of, 28. Elysius, History of, 11. Emancipation, Sikh, 85. Emigration to India, Farsi, 33. Udakas on Magi, 11. Esnik, History of, 11. Fatalists, Tana, 59, Fernson on Jaina temples, 67. Festivals, Parsi, 36. Fire, Sacred, 39. Fire temples, Farsi, 29. Folklore, Jaina, 66. Kuahambar, Days of Rest, 37. Jain, 51. G-Pountha hymns, 19. Gautama, date of, 47, Geiger on Zoroaster, 25. German authorities on Zoroaster, 12. Gods, JAA, 66. Folden Temple at Amritsar, 89. Gomati, 68. Good, Jaina Doctrine, 64. Gozala, 44. Goff, Sir H., Battles of, 78. Government, Parsi, 37. Govindial Sati, 75. Granth, the, Contents of, 80, Language of, 8I, Doctrines of, 83, Teaching of, 88. G. Ishara, 79. Gurmatkal, 77. Kiaksmukal, 81. Guru, meaning of term, 73, authority of, 87. Idhoka, the, 23. Hauma, 30. Irdinj, Sir H, 79. Hari, doctrine of, 84. Hagan Farsi, 13. Hermippus on Magi, 11. Herodotus on Magi, 11. Hinduism, modem, 6 grams. Husvarus, 17. Hyde, Thomas, on Phaesi, 12. M. Jaina doctrine of, 64. Indriya, 63. Inertia, Jaina doctrine of, 63, Iranian languages, 18. Jacobi on Jaina, 40, 62, on G. Sala, 44, on Canon, 54, 62. Hahang Alra, 74. Jadav, 82. Jaina, extent of, 39, origin of, 40, founder of, 41, 5 vows of, 46 J tradition of, 49, literature of, 52, philosophy of, 57, early doctrines of, 58, religious practices of, 62 doctrines of today, 63, monks, 65, laymen, 65, ritual and pantheon, 66 temples, 6y. Jainism and Buddhism compared, 42, and Brahmanism, 44, Lassen on, 44, doctrines of, 65, worship of, 66, temples, 67. Jamasp, 36. JFTPJL, the, 80. Jots, 75. Jesuits, visit the Punjab, 74. Jina, doctrine of worship of, 66, Jiva, 63. Iblur, 71. Kadasi Yat, victory at, 32. Kadmai sect, 36. Alalpasutra, the, 50. Poundankri, 35. Poundandragupta, 55. Kanishka, 51, Carmen, 60. Katu Yamasambarasamto, 61. Kagsi, 61. Khalsa, the sect, 75. Ahalsa Prayer Union, the, 91. Karsaji Eastamji Kama, 36. Korda Avesta, 22. Kordad Lal, a Parsi festival, 37. Klewakar on Parsi, 12. Kodakagana, 51. Urfiavada, the, 59. Ishatriya caste, 48. Dizias on Magi, 11, Kusti, 31. Lahana, 73. Lajita Vistara, 54. Dasan on Jainism, 44. Law, Farsi, 37. Lawrence, Major H, 79. Layman, Jaina, 65. Idfa, Jaina doctrine of, 63, Index 95 Life after death, 86. Literature, Jaina, 52. Liturgy, 38. Logograms, 17. Magi, the, 10, 28. Mahayura, 41, and Buddha, 42. Influence of G. Arozala on, 44. Masudi, 11. Marriage Ceremonia, Phaesi, 31. Maya, 84. Mazdaism, 28. Metoife, Mr. C, 78. Meters, Jaina, 53. Moksha, 64. Monastic orders, 47. Monks, Jaina, 65. Morality, 27, Morals, 28. Mount Abu, temples at, 67. Mutiny, Indian, 8 Amutra inscriptions, the, 50. Nahavand, victory at, 32. Namdef, 82. Napier, Circe, 79. Napier, Lord, 80. Nanak, Guru, 71. Nanak Badal, Guru Baba, 72. Nask Hooks, 20, divisions of, 21. Katapanta, 44. Nigatha, the, 58. Nirjara, 64. Nirmatas Sadhu, the, 90. Offerings, Parsi, 30. Oldenburg on Jaina, 4a Omar, Cagif, 32. Pahlavi, I. Pahtana, Temple at, 67. Fakaya, 37. Punjab, the, Sikh conquest of, 78 settlement of, 80, Christian missions to, 91. Pantheism, Sikh, 83. Papa, 64. Firuznath, 68. Parsi emigration to India, 33, population, mortality, occupations, 33, costumes, 34, sex and calendar, 35, festival B, 36, law and government, 37, Farsiism, 9. Parsi scriptures, the, 14, language of, 18. Farsva, 61. Paiteti, a Parsi festival, 36. Poghal, 76. Panzanias, 11. Fa'and, 16. Persia, Mohammedan conquest of, 32. Persian gods, 27. Persian language, 16. Philosophy, Jaina, 57. Pliny on Magi, 2. Plutarch on Magi, 11. Prakrits, Jaina, 53. Prayers of the Osta, 30. Punya, 64. Purity, Parsi, 30. Purva, SS quality, 57. Sab Mag, 10. Bags, the, 81. Imdas Sadi, Guru Baba, 73. Bamananda, 71. Banjit Singh, 78. Bapithvan, a Parsi festival, 37. Basque on Parsi, 12. Boxer, 77. Sacrifices, Zoroastrian, 28. Sawi, Sylvesterda, on Parsi, 12. Sadaksa, 31. Sankara, 70. Saiva, 70. Samniazan, the, 47. Sambara, 64. Sari, 3s. Sasanian dynasty, the, 32, sects, Parsi, 35. Service to the saints, 88. Shapur I, king, 21. Shapur II, 32. Shihenshai, the, 36. Shrarastani, 11. Siddhartha, the, 5 degrees, te of, 55 contents of, 56. Siha, story of, 59. Sikh, the, religious history of, 72 succession of Guru, 73, political history of, 75, as soldiers, 76, wars of, 78, defeat of, 79, second war of, 79, sacred books of, 80 doctrines of, 83, observances of, 88, temple of, 89, population of, 90, denominations of, 90. Sikhism, rise of, 69, sects of, 70. Sin, origin of, 85. Siva, 70. 96 Index Smaxta, 70. Sodarn, the, 80. Sohila, the, 81. Soma, 30. Sopurku, the, 81. Soul, the, Jaina view of, 63, souls, Jaina doctrine of, 65. Spelling, Jaina, 53. Spiegel, p. on Farsi, law, on Zoroaster, 25. Strabo on Magi, 11, Substance, 57. Sutra, the, 90. Tetambara, the, 55. Teg Bahadur, 75. Temples, Jaina and Theodorus on Magi, 2. Theopompus on Magi, 11. Tirthakara, 66. Towers of Silence, 31. Tradition, Jaina, 49. Trilokan, 82. Trimurti, 70. Uddhizai, the, 90. Utsapinel, 65. Vipyohaka, 51. Vaisali, 44. Vaishnava, the, 70. Yakash, King, 21. Vandaldad, edition of, 12 pure, 23. Vishnu, 71. Visparade, 37. Vistasptast, 37. Toes of Jaina, Brahman, 46. Buddha, and Water, Jaina view of, 63. Weber on Jaina, 40, 49, 56. West on Parsi, 13. Westergaard on Farsi, 13. Wilson on Jaina, 40. World, duration of the, 27. Xanthans of Sardis on Zoroaster, 25, Yist, the, 23. Yizdeserti era, 36. Zendavesta, the, 14, language of, 17, extent of, 20, editions of, 21 present contents of, 22, Avesta proper, 22, El Torda Avesta, 22, interpretation of, 23, ritual of, 29, birth, marriage and burial ceremonies, 31, Zoroaster, history of, 25, birthplace of, 26. Zoroastrianism, 10, Bible witness to, 10, classical, g, medieval, 2, European, 11, history of the founder of, 25, theology before Alexander, a 6 persecution of, 32. Oxford, Horace Hart, printer to the university.